The Duke's voice cut through the parlor like a blade through silk. "I need a wife. One of you will do." Four sisters sat frozen, their father's debts hanging in the air like smoke from a dying fire. Outside rain hammered the cracked windows of a house that had once known better days. This was salvation dressed as slaughter, a transaction where love was never part of the bargain. But when the youngest daughter finally arrived, mud-stained and defiant from a day spent among the broken and forgotten, she looked at the man who held her family's fate in his hands and said the one thing no one expected: no. What happened next would unravel everything: power, pride, and the very definition of choice. If you want to see how far this story goes, how a single word can torch an empire and rebuild it from ash, stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far Alar's rebellion travels. The Vance house had been grand once. You could still see it in the bones. The high ceilings with their water-stained plasterwork, the wide staircase that creaked now on every third step, the chandelier in the entry hall that hadn't held candles in 2 years. Margaret Vance kept the curtains drawn in the front rooms so the neighbors wouldn't see how the furniture had been sold off piece by piece, replaced by cheaper versions that didn't quite fit the spaces left behind. On this particular afternoon, those curtains were open. Margaret had insisted. "He needs to see we still have standards," she'd said that morning, her hand shaking as she arranged the last decent tea set they owned. "Even if we're struggling. The word was a masterpiece of understatement. Richard Vance hadn't just accumulated debts. He'd built monuments to them: bad investments, worse gambling, and a stubborn refusal to see reality until it was crushing him. 3 months ago, the creditors had started circling. 6 weeks ago, the final notices had arrived. Now they had perhaps a month before everything was seized, sold, scattered. The four Vance daughters sat in the parlor like birds on a wire, each processing the situation in her own way. Celestine, the eldest at 26, had positioned herself nearest their mother, spine straight, hands folded in her lap with practiced grace. She'd been groomed for this her entire life. The dutiful daughter, the one who would marry well and restore the family name. Her blonde hair was perfectly arranged despite the absence of a lady's maid. Her dress was 3 years old but immaculately maintained. She looked like she was sitting for a portrait titled "Dignity in Decline." "Stop fidgeting, Rosalind," she murmured without moving her lips. Rosalind, 23 and seated by the window, had been twisting a handkerchief between her fingers for the past 20 minutes. She had their father's dark hair and nervous energy, always moving, always anxious. "I can't help it. Do you think he's actually coming? Maybe he changed his mind, maybe—" "He's coming," Celestine said firmly. "The Duke of Ashford doesn't send notice and then simply not appear." Seraphine, 21, made a small noise that might have been a laugh or a sob. She sat curled in the corner of the settee, her auburn hair falling loose from its pins. Pretty in a way that photographs well but doesn't quite translate to real life. Features just slightly too delicate, eyes that always seemed to be looking at something in the middle distance. She'd been engaged once, 2 years ago, to a merchant's son with kind eyes and modern ideas. Then the debts had surfaced and he'd quietly withdrawn. She hadn't really spoken to anyone properly since. "This is insane," she said softly. "We're not livestock at market." "Aren't we?" Rosalind's voice had gone high and thin. "That's exactly what this is. He's coming to inspect us. To choose one of us like we're—" "That's enough." Margaret Vance swept into the room carrying the tea service herself, a task that would have horrified her a year ago. She was 52 and looked 70, the weight of maintaining appearances having carved deep lines around her mouth and eyes. "We will conduct ourselves with grace. The Duke of Ashford has made an extraordinarily generous offer to consider an alliance with this family despite our circumstances. We will be grateful." "Grateful," Seraphine repeated, testing the word like it was poison. "Yes." Margaret set down the tray with shaking hands. "Grateful. One of you will marry one of the wealthiest, most powerful men in the country. You'll want for nothing. The family debts will be erased. Your father will be saved from debtor's prison. Your sisters will be protected. I don't see what's so difficult to understand about—" The door opened. Richard Vance entered, and the room fell silent. He looked like a man who'd been hollowed out and poorly reassembled. His clothes hung loose on a frame that had once been robust. His eyes darted constantly, never settling, as if he was perpetually calculating odds that never came out in his favor. Behind him came a man in simple but expensive clothing, a secretary or steward, presumably. "He's here," Richard said unnecessarily. "The Duke is here. In our home. Everyone just..." He gestured vaguely at them, as if they were pieces on a board he could no longer quite remember how to play. The steward, middle-aged, with the weathered face of someone who'd worked his way up from nothing, surveyed the room with sharp, assessing eyes. "His Grace will join you momentarily. He's completing some business correspondence in his carriage." His gaze landed on each daughter in turn, cataloging, measuring. "All 4 daughters are present?" "3," Margaret said quickly. "Our youngest, Elara, she was unavoidably detained this afternoon. She'll be joining us shortly, I'm certain." 4 daughters were specified in the agreement. The steward's voice was flat, carrying the authority of someone who spoke for power itself. His Grace was quite clear. Richard's face went gray. "She'll be here. She's just... Elara works in the city. She helps at a charity house. She loses track of time, but she'll..." "Works?" The steward's eyebrow lifted fractionally. "A daughter of this house works?" The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Celestine stood smoothly, stepping into the awkward silence with the practiced ease of someone who'd been managing family disasters for years. "Our sister is very charitable. She volunteers her time among the unfortunate. It's quite admirable, really. I'm certain she simply didn't realize the time and..." The door opened again. The man who entered didn't look like he should be called Grace anything. He was tall, yes, well over 6 feet. But that wasn't what hit you first. What hit you was the absolute stillness of him. He moved into the room like winter itself had taken human form, all sharp angles and cold precision, dark hair going gray at the temples despite looking no older than 35. Eyes the color of steel in winter light. A face that might have been handsome if it ever softened, which it clearly never did. Dorian Hale, Duke of Ashford, surveyed the Vance parlor the way a general might survey a battlefield before deciding it wasn't worth the casualties. Margaret sank into a curtsy so deep her knees must have screamed. "Your Grace, we are so honored." "Unnecessary." He cut her off without looking at her. His gaze had fixed on the 3 daughters, moving from face to face with the clinical detachment of someone selecting horses. "You are Celestine. You are Rosalind. You are Seraphine." They weren't questions. He'd done his research. Celestine recovered first, offering a small, graceful nod. "Your Grace, your father owes approximately £47,000 to various creditors, with additional interest accruing daily. The primary estate is mortgaged beyond recovery. There are outstanding gambling debts to at least 6 gentlemen's clubs, 3 private lenders, and 1 rather unsavory establishment in the East End that I wouldn't recommend discussing in polite company." Richard made a strangled noise. Dorian ignored him. "I have purchased all debts as of this morning. I now own, effectively, everything your family has, had, or will have. This is not a negotiation. This is a transaction." Rosalind's handkerchief tore in her hands. "I require a wife," Dorian continued in that same flat, emotionless tone, "for reasons that don't concern you. Love is not a factor. Romance is not a factor. What I offer is this: complete erasure of all family debts, a substantial annual allowance for your parents, dowries for the unmarried daughters, and the protection of the Ashford name. In exchange, one of you will marry me, maintain my household, appear at necessary social functions, and produce an heir within 3 years. Questions?" The silence was suffocating. Seraphine let out a small, broken laugh. "You can't be serious. I don't make jokes." Dorian's gaze shifted to her and she flinched. "I'm offering you more than your family deserves given the spectacular nature of your father's failures. This is generosity, Miss Vance. You simply lack the perspective to recognize it." "Generosity," Seraphine whispered. "You're buying a wife like you'd buy a horse, and you call it generosity." "I'm saving your family from complete ruin and offering one of you a life of comfort and security. Yes, I call that generous." He turned to Celestine. "You're the eldest. You've been trained for this. You understand duty." Celestine's hands were trembling, but her voice stayed level. "I understand many things, Your Grace. Good. Then you understand that I'm not a cruel man, but I am an honest one. I won't pretend to offer what I cannot give. There will be no poetry, no grand passion, no sweeping romance. There will be respect, security, and honesty. That is more than most marriages of our class can claim. How very pragmatic, Celestine said softly. Pragmatism has kept me alive and prosperous, while better men drowned in sentiment. Dorian's attention shifted to Rosalind, who looked like she might faint. You appear fragile. Are you prone to illness? What? I don't... Rosalind stammered. A simple yes or no suffices. No, Celestine answered for her sister. Rosalind is perfectly healthy. She's merely overwhelmed. Overwhelmed by honesty? Dorian's expression didn't change. That doesn't bode well. Margaret finally found her voice again, though it came out strangled. Your Grace, perhaps if we might discuss this over tea? Allow the girls to become more comfortable with... I don't require them to be comfortable. I require one of them to be willing. He checked his pocket watch with the air of a man who had better places to be. You have until I finish this tea to decide amongst yourselves. I don't particularly care which one. The eldest would be traditional. I'll leave it to you. He sat, accepted tea from Margaret's shaking hands, waited. Richard looked like he might be sick. Margaret's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. The three daughters stared at each other with the wild eyes of the condemned. Then Celestine stood. I'll do it, she said quietly. It makes the most sense. I'm the eldest. I was always meant to marry for the family's benefit. This is just... She trailed off, then finished with heartbreaking simplicity. This is just what it is. Celestine, no, Rosalind started. What choice do we have? Celestine's voice cracked for the first time. Tell me, Roz, what choice? Father goes to prison? We lose everything? End up on the streets? At least this way everyone survives. At least, how noble, Dorian said. And there might have been the faintest edge of something in his voice. Not quite mockery. Not quite respect. Very well, we'll draw up the door slammed open hard enough to crack against the wall. Alara Vance stood in the doorway, breathing hard, soaking wet from the rain that had started sometime in the last hour. Her dark hair had come completely loose from whatever she'd attempted that morning, hanging in wet ropes around a face smudged with dirt and exhaustion. Her dress, never fancy to begin with, was splattered with mud up to the knees. She looked like she'd been in a fight with the world and lost. She also looked furious. What? She said, water dripping onto the carpet. In the hell is happening here? Margaret's face went from white to crimson. Alara, your language, your appearance. We have a guest. I can see that. Alara's dark eyes locked onto Dorian, who had risen from his seat with an expression of faint interest, the first real emotion he'd shown since arriving. Let me guess. The Duke? The one who's here to solve all our problems by purchasing one of us? Alara? Richard started weakly. No. She cut him off with a gesture. No, I've been hearing about this for 3 days. Everyone in this house dancing around it, talking in whispers, acting like it's some great opportunity instead of what it actually is. I just didn't believe it. I didn't believe we'd actually... She turned to Celestine. You can't be serious. You can't actually be considering this. Celestine's face had gone very still. It's already decided. Like hell it is. Alara. Celestine's voice dropped, taking on the tone she'd used when they were children, and Alara was about to do something reckless. You don't understand the situation. I understand perfectly. Alara took 3 steps into the room, leaving wet footprints. She looked at Dorian like he was something she'd found on the bottom of her shoe. You're a rich man who wants to buy a wife because apparently that's easier than actually earning someone's affection. You've shown up here waving money around because you know we're desperate, and desperate people don't have the luxury of dignity. And my family is so terrified of losing their comfortable lives that they're actually going to let you do it. Margaret gasped. Richard made a wounded noise. Rosalind covered her mouth. Dorian just looked at Alara with those cold, assessing eyes. You must be the 4th daughter, he said. I must be. You work in charity houses. I work with people who've been chewed up and spit out by people like you. Yes. People like me. He said it like he was tasting the words. You've known me for 30 seconds, And you've already determined my character completely? I know enough. Alara's hands were shaking from cold or rage or both. I know you walked into my family's home and laid out a transaction where a human being is the commodity. I know you did it without even pretending there was anything decent about it. At least have the courage to call it what it is. You're exploiting our desperation. I'm offering a solution to a problem your father created. You're offering to trade money for a person. There's a word for that. The room went completely silent. Dorian's expression didn't change, but something shifted in the air. A drop in temperature, a tightening of tension. When he spoke, his voice was very quiet and very precise. I'm offering marriage. Legal, binding, respectable marriage. I'm offering security, protection, and status. I am being honest about the terms, which is more than most men in my position would do. If you find honesty offensive, perhaps the problem is not with my offer, but with your inability to face reality. Reality? Alara laughed, and it was not a kind sound. You want to talk about reality? I spent today with women who sold themselves to feed their children. With men who lost everything because someone like you decided their labor wasn't worth fair wages. With children who'll die before 20 because they can't afford medicine. That's reality. This? Baz. She gestured at the parlor, at her sisters, at the whole elegant nightmare. This is just a prettier version of the same thing. You're not better than the men who exploit those women. You've just got better manners and more expensive clothes. Alara, that is enough. Margaret's voice cracked like a whip. Apologize to His Grace immediately. For what? Telling the truth? For being unspeakably rude to the man who is trying to save this family from ruin. He's not trying to save us, Mother. He's trying to buy us. There's a difference. Dorian held up one hand, silencing Margaret mid-breath. His eyes never left Alara. You think I'm a monster, he said. It wasn't a question. I think you're a man who's mistaken wealth for worth and power for decency. And yet I'm the one offering to prevent your family's destruction. At what cost? Celestine's life? Her freedom? Her chance at actual happiness? I'm offering her more than she'd get anywhere else given your family's current position. Or did you have a better proposal waiting? A prince on a white horse, perhaps, ready to sweep in and solve everything with true love? Alara's jaw tightened. I have reality, which is that my sister shouldn't have to marry a man who admits he'll never love her just because our father couldn't control himself. Your sister is an adult capable of making her own choices. Is she? Or is she so beaten down by duty and fear that she can't see she has any? Celestine's voice cut through the argument like a knife. Alara, stop! Alara turned to her sister, and her expression cracked for the first time. Celly, please, you can't. I can. I am. Celestine stood very straight, very still. You don't understand because you've never had to. You've been out there, she waved vaguely toward the door, helping strangers, being noble, while the rest of us dealt with the reality of this house falling apart. I'm the eldest. This is my responsibility. It's not your responsibility to sacrifice yourself. It's my responsibility to protect this family. And this is how I do it. Celestine's voice shook but held. His Grace is right. This is more than we could hope for otherwise. It's practical. It's sensible. It's giving up. It's growing up. Celestine met her sister's eyes. Something you might try. The words hit like a slap. Alara stepped back, something wounded flashing across her face. Dorian watched this exchange with that same cold attention, then spoke. The offer extends to all 4 daughters equally. If the youngest wishes to volunteer instead, no, Alara said immediately. I would rather starve. That can be arranged. Alara, please. Richard finally stepped forward, and he looked ancient. Please, just be quiet. Go upstairs. Clean yourself up. This doesn't concern you. Doesn't concern me? Alara stared at her father. My sister is being sold and it doesn't concern me. Your sister is being saved. We're all being saved. Thanks to His Grace's extraordinary generosity. Stop calling it generous. The words burst out of Alara like something that had been building for days. Stop dressing it up in pretty language. He's buying a wife because he's too cold or too broken or too proud to actually earn someone's love, and we're selling Celestine because you gambled away everything we had. There's nothing generous about any of this. There's nothing noble. It's just. She ran out of words, or maybe just ran out of fight. Dorian studied her for a long moment, then turned to Celestine. You're certain? Celestine nodded. I am. Very well. He turned to his steward. Draw up the papers. We'll marry within the month. I'll have my solicitors contact yours. He glanced at Richard, or whoever is currently managing your affairs. Your Grace, Margaret breathed. We cannot thank you enough. Don't thank me. I'm not doing this for you. Dorian collected his coat, preparing to leave. I'm doing this because I need a wife and your family needs money, and neither of us is in a position to be sentimental about it. That's all this is. Don't mistake business for kindness. He moved toward the door, then paused next to Alara, who stood dripping and defiant and clearly holding back tears. You think honesty is cruelty? He said quietly, so only she could hear. But lies are crueler. I could have come here promising love and romance and happily ever after. I could have made your sister believe this was something it isn't. Instead, I told her the truth. She knows exactly what she's getting. There will be no surprises, no disappointments, no broken promises. Is that really worse than pretty lies that shatter under pressure? Alara looked up at him, eyes blazing. You think you're being kind by being cold? I think I'm being honest, which is the kindest thing I know how to be. He left. The room erupted. Margaret was crying with relief. Richard was already talking about which debts to settle first. Rosalind was hugging Celestine, who stood very still in the center of the chaos, her face blank. Alara watched her sister and felt something break inside her chest. She turned and ran. Up the stairs, past the water-stained walls and creaking floors, into the small room at the back of the house that had been hers since childhood. She slammed the door and stood there, dripping on the worn rug, shaking with rage and helplessness, and something darker she couldn't name. This was wrong. All of it was wrong, but she didn't know how to fix it. 3 weeks later, Alara stood in the kitchen of St. Catherine's Refuge, elbow deep in dishwater, and tried not to think about the fact that her sister was getting married in 5 days. St. Catherine's occupied the shell of an old warehouse in the East End. It wasn't much, drafty in winter, stifling in summer, always smelling faintly of cabbage and desperation, but it was something. A place where people with nowhere else to go could get a hot meal and a safe place to sleep. A place where children who'd been working 12-hour factory shifts could learn to read. A place that survived on donations that never quite stretched far enough. Alara had started volunteering here 2 years ago, after Seraphine's engagement had fallen apart and the house had filled with a grief no one wanted to name. She'd needed somewhere to put her rage at the unfairness of it all, somewhere to be useful. She'd found both at St. Catherine's. You're scrubbing that pot like it insulted your mother, said a voice behind her. Alara looked up to find Mrs. Brennan, who ran the refuge with the efficiency of a general and the warmth of a grandmother, watching her with knowing eyes. Sorry, Alara muttered, easing up on the scrubbing. Don't be sorry. Be honest. What's eating you? Nothing. Try again. Alara set down the pot, defeated. My sister's getting married in 5 days to a man who treats marriage like a business contract. My family's ecstatic because he's rich and we're broke, and apparently that's all that matters. And I can't do anything about it except watch her walk into a life that's going to make her miserable. Mrs. Brennan was quiet for a moment, then said gently, Did you ask your sister how she feels about it? She says she's fine with it, that it's practical, sensible. And you don't believe her? I don't believe anyone should have to settle for practical when it comes to marriage. Not everyone gets the luxury of romantic ideals, love. That's what he said. Alara's hands tightened on the edge of the sink. The Duke. He said honesty was kinder than false promises, that at least Celestine knows what she's getting into. And you disagree? I think there's a difference between honesty and brutality, between being realistic and being cold. Mrs. Brennan leaned against the counter, considering. You know what I see when I look at you, Alara Vance? A girl who's so angry at injustice she can barely function. And that's not a criticism. We need people who get angry. But sometimes anger makes us see things in black and white when they're really much more complicated. There's nothing complicated about a rich man buying a wife. Isn't there? Mrs. Brennan tilted her head. From what you've told me, he was honest about his limitations. He offered security in exchange for partnership. No lies, no false promises. Half the women I serve here would kill for that kind of honesty from the men who use them and abandon them. That's not the same, isn't it? Or is it just that you can't stand seeing someone you love accept terms that feel like defeat? Alara opened her mouth to argue, then closed it. Mrs. Brennan patted her shoulder. I'm not saying the Duke is right. I'm saying maybe there's more than one way to be right. Maybe your sister knows something you don't. Maybe this is her choice, genuinely made, and your job isn't to save her from it, but to support her through it. Even if I think she's making a mistake? Even then. Especially then. The conversation was interrupted by a commotion in the main hall, raised voices, someone crying. Both women moved toward the sound instantly. In the main room, a young woman stood clutching a baby while two older boys clung to her skirts. She couldn't have been more than 22, with the hollow-eyed look of someone who hadn't slept properly in months. Mud caked her shoes. Her dress was patched but clean. Please, she was saying to James, one of the other volunteers. Please, we just need somewhere for the night, just one night. I can pay. She fumbled with a small purse, hands shaking. We're full up, James said, not unkindly. The fire inspector already threatened to shut us down if we exceed capacity. I'm sorry, but we'll make room. Mrs. Brennan's voice cut through the noise. She looked at James. Move some of the cots closer together in the women's section. These children need a roof tonight. Mrs. Brennan, we're already over. I said we'll make room. James sighed but nodded, moving off to rearrange things. The young woman sagged with relief. Thank you so much. I promise we'll be gone first thing in the morning. My husband died 3 weeks ago, and the landlord said we had to leave, and I've been trying to find work, but no one will hire me with the children, and it's all right. Alara stepped forward, taking the woman's arm gently. You're safe here tonight. Let's get you and the children something to eat, yes? As she led the small family toward the kitchen, Alara felt that familiar rage building again. Another woman destroyed by circumstances beyond her control. Another family broken by a system that crushed anyone who couldn't keep up. This was what happened when you had no power, when you had no choices. This was why Celestine's surrender felt like betrayal. But as she settled the children with bowls of soup and listened to their mother's story, her voice shaking with exhaustion and fear and desperate hope, Alara couldn't help but wonder, what would she have done in Celestine's position? If it wasn't just her own life on the line, but her whole family's survival. If she was honest, really, brutally honest, she didn't know, and that uncertainty terrified her. The wedding was set for Saturday afternoon in the chapel at Ashford Estate. Alara stood in her sister's room the morning of the ceremony, watching Celestine sit perfectly still while a hired maid arranged her hair. The wedding dress hung on the wardrobe door, cream silk, elegant and expensive, paid for by the groom. Everything was paid for by the groom now. The debts had been settled. The house had been saved. Richard Vance walked around like a man who'd been pulled back from the edge of a cliff, giddy with relief. Celestine looked like she was about to walk off that same cliff voluntarily. You can still say no, Alara said quietly. Celestine met her eyes in the mirror. We've had this conversation 6 times in 3 weeks. I'll keep having it until you actually listen. I am listening. I just disagree. Celestine's voice was gentle, but firm. Alara, I know you think I'm making a terrible mistake. I know you think I'm giving up on happiness or love or whatever romantic notion you're holding on to, but I'm not a child. I understand what I'm doing. Do you? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're resigning yourself to a life of cold formality with a man who admitted he'll never love you. He was honest about that. I appreciate the honesty. Since when is honesty enough? Celestine was quiet for a moment, then said, Do you remember when Seraphine's engagement ended? The change in subject caught Alara off guard. Of course. Do you remember how she was before that? How in love she was? How she talked about Oliver like he'd hung the moon? Yes. And do you remember how destroyed she was when he left? How he made all these promises about love and forever, and then abandoned her the second things got difficult? Celestine's reflection looked older than 26. I watched our sister shatter because she believed in romance. because she thought love was enough. And maybe I'm a coward, but I don't want to break like that. I'd rather have honesty I can prepare for than promises that won't last. Elara felt something twist in her chest. So you're settling for nothing because you're afraid to hope for something? I'm accepting what's real instead of chasing what's not. Celestine turned on the stool to face her sister directly. Dorian has been nothing but straightforward. He's told me exactly what this marriage will be. We've discussed finances, household management, social obligations, even the logistics of producing an heir. Nothing is left to assumption or romantic fantasy. And yes, it's cold. Yes, it's practical. But it's also safe. I know where I stand. I know what's expected. There are no illusions waiting to shatter. There's also no joy, no warmth, no actual partnership. Partnership can be built. It doesn't have to start with passion. And if it never develops into anything more than a business arrangement, Celestine smiled sadly, then at least I'll have been useful. At least I'll have saved our family. That's worth something, isn't it? Elara wanted to scream, or cry, or shake her sister until she saw sense. Instead, she said, "You're worth more than your usefulness, Celly. Maybe, but right now, useful is all I can afford to be." The maid finished with Celestine's hair, an elegant arrangement of braids and pearls that probably cost more than most people earned in a month. Celestine stood, allowing the dress to be brought forward. "Will you help me?" she asked Elara. It felt like a test, like Celestine was asking if Elara could set aside her objections long enough to support her sister's choice, even if she disagreed with it. Elara swallowed hard and nodded. They dressed Celestine in silence, the heavy silk sliding over carefully arranged undergarments, buttons fastening up the back in an endless line. When it was done, Celestine looked like a portrait of a bride, beautiful, elegant, utterly untouchable. "Do I look acceptable?" Celestine asked. "You look beautiful," Elara said truthfully. Then, unable to help herself, and terrified. "I'm not terrified." Liar. Celestine's composure cracked just slightly. "Of course I'm terrified. I'm about to marry a man I barely know who's made it clear he wants a business partner, not a wife. But being terrified doesn't change what needs to happen." "It could. You could walk out right now. We'd survive somehow. We always have." "No, we haven't. We've been drowning slowly for 2 years. This is the first real air any of us have had." Celestine took Elara's hands. "I need you to let me do this. I need you to trust that I know my own mind, even if you don't agree with my choice." Elara looked at her sister, really looked at her. Saw the fear, yes, but also the determination. The resignation, but also the resolution. "I'll be there," she said finally. "At the wedding. I'll be there. Thank you." The chapel at Ashford Estate was old, elegant, and currently filled with approximately 40 guests, mostly Dorian's business associates and a handful of social connections Margaret had somehow managed to rustle up despite the family's scandal. The Vances sat in the front row, Richard looking relieved, Margaret looking triumphant, Rosalind and Seraphine looking ill. Elara stood off to the side, having refused to be a bridesmaid. She wore a simple dress, the nicest she owned, which wasn't saying much, and felt wildly out of place among all the expensive clothes and careful manners. Then Dorian entered from a side door, and the room went quiet. He looked exactly as he had 3 weeks ago, cold, composed, utterly unmoved by the circumstance. He wore formal attire that probably cost more than the Vance house was currently worth. He stood at the altar like he was about to conduct a business meeting, not marry a woman. Elara hated him with sudden, renewed intensity. The music started. Celestine appeared at the back of the chapel on Richard's arm. She walked down that aisle like she was walking to her execution, spine straight, face blank, every step perfectly measured. When she reached the altar, Richard placed her hand in Dorian's with shaking fingers. Dorian looked at his bride with the same assessing gaze he'd used that first day in the parlor. No warmth, no affection, just evaluation. The ceremony began. The priest droned through traditional vows. Celestine and Dorian repeated their lines with the emotional investment of people reading a shopping list. "Do you, Dorian Alexander Hale, take this woman?" "I do." "Do you, Celestine Marie Vance, take this man?" The pause was infinitesimal, barely noticeable, but Alara noticed. "I do," Celestine said, and her voice didn't shake at all. "I now pronounce you husband and wife." It was done. Dorian lifted Celestine's veil with mechanical precision and pressed a brief, perfunctory kiss to her lips. It lasted perhaps 2 seconds. Then it was over. The guests applauded politely. Margaret wept with relief. Richard looked like a man pardoned from execution, and Celestine looked like she'd just signed away her life. The reception was held in Ashford's main hall, a massive room with soaring ceilings and enough wealth on display to feed half of London's poor for a year. Alara stood in a corner, drinking champagne she didn't want, and watching her sister move through the crowd like a beautiful ghost. Dorian stayed by Celestine's side, playing the role of attentive groom with the same cold competence he brought to everything. He introduced her to various dignitaries and business partners. He ensured she had refreshments. He even pulled out her chair when they sat for the wedding breakfast. It was all perfectly correct and utterly hollow. "Quite the performance, isn't it?" Alara turned to find an older woman beside her, maybe 60, with sharp eyes and expensive jewelry. "Excuse me?" "The Duke, playing the devoted husband." The woman sipped her own champagne. "He's very good at playing roles, less good at actually feeling anything." "You know him?" "I'm his aunt, Lady Marguerite Hale." She studied Alara with interest. "You must be the difficult sister, the one who called him a monster." "I never said monster." "No?" "Pity. He could use someone calling him that occasionally. Keeps him from getting too comfortable." Lady Marguerite's smile was knowing. "You don't approve of this marriage." "Does it matter if I approve?" "Probably not, but it's refreshing to see someone willing to be honest about it. Everyone else is busy pretending this is a love match instead of a transaction." She paused. "Though for what it's worth, I think your sister might surprise you." "How so?" "Dorian needs someone who won't be intimidated by him, someone who can stand their ground. He's been surrounded by sycophants and social climbers for so long, he's forgotten what actual partnership looks like." Lady Marguerite glanced at Celestine, who was smiling politely at something a guest had said. "Your sister has steel in her. She just hides it better than you do. Steel won't help if he never sees her as anything more than a business arrangement. Won't it? I've known Dorian since he was a boy. He's cold because he learned that caring about anything makes you vulnerable. But he's not incapable of feeling. He's just very, very out of practice." She finished her champagne. "Give them time. This might turn into something neither of them expected. Or it might turn into exactly what he promised, a cold, practical arrangement with no real connection. That too is possible." Lady Marguerite smiled. "I suppose we'll see which one your sister chooses to build." She drifted away, leaving Alara more unsettled than before. The reception dragged on. Speeches were made, mostly by people who barely knew the couple and were clearly there for the social advantage. Toasts were raised. The wedding cake was cut with Dorian and Celestine's hands on the knife together, both of them smiling for the photographer with the genuine warmth of two strangers forced to share an elevator. Finally, blessedly, it ended. Celestine and Dorian prepared to depart for Ashford Estate, where they would live. Celestine hugged each of her sisters, her composure finally cracking slightly when she reached Alara. "I'll be all right," she whispered. "I promise." "You better be," Alara whispered back. "Because if he hurts you, I don't care how rich or powerful he is. I'll find a way to destroy him." Celestine actually laughed at that, a real laugh, brief and startled. "I believe you would." Then she was swept away to the carriage, Dorian handing her in with impersonal courtesy before climbing in himself. Alara watched the carriage pull away and felt like she'd failed some essential test she hadn't known she was taking. Her sister was married, to a man who treated love like a weakness, and there was absolutely nothing Alara could do about it. She threw herself into work at St. Catherine's with renewed intensity over the following week. Longer hours, harder tasks. Anything to avoid thinking about Celestine and that enormous estate with that cold, distant man. Mrs. Brennan watched her with knowing eyes, but said nothing. Until the afternoon when Alara scrubbed the same section of floor 3 times without noticing. "All right," Mrs. Brennan said, taking the brush from her hands. "That's enough. You're going to wear a hole in the wood." "I'm fine." "You're the opposite of fine. When's the last time you slept? Alara didn't answer. When's the last time you ate something that wasn't leftover soup from the kitchen? Still no answer. Mrs. Brennan sighed. Have you heard from your sister? A letter arrived yesterday. She says she's settling in well. The estate is beautiful. Dorian is polite. Alara's hands clenched. Polite. Like they're strangers sharing a house instead of husband and wife. Give them time. Everyone keeps saying that. Give them time. As if time will magically make him capable of actual human emotion. You really hate him, don't you? I hate what he represents. I hate that men like him can buy whatever they want, including wives. I hate that we live in a world where that's not just legal, but expected. Alara stood abruptly. I hate feeling this powerless. Then do something about it. What can I possibly do? The marriage is legal. Celestine made her choice. It's done. I didn't say fix your sister's marriage. I said do something about feeling powerless. Mrs. Brennan crossed her arms. You've been volunteering here for 2 years. You're good at it. People trust you. The children love you. You have skills, Alara. Use them for something more than just distracting yourself from your own anger. Like what? Like actually making a difference instead of just mourning injustice. The words hit harder than they should have. Alara opened her mouth to argue, then closed it. Because Mrs. Brennan was right. She'd been using St. Catherine's as a pressure valve for her rage, but she hadn't actually done anything to change the systems that created that rage in the first place. I don't know how, she admitted quietly. Then learn. Mrs. Brennan's expression softened. You're young, you're smart, and you're angry enough to actually challenge things instead of accepting them. That's rare. Don't waste it on just scrubbing floors and feeling helpless. Before Alara could respond, the door to the refuge banged open. A man stood there, well-dressed, slightly out of breath, clearly not from this neighborhood. Miss Vance? He said, looking around. Miss Alara Vance? That's me. I have a message from His Grace, the Duke of Ashford. The man produced a sealed letter. He requests your presence at Ashford Estate this afternoon at your earliest convenience. Alara stared at the letter like it might bite her. Tell him no. Miss Vance, His Grace was quite insistent. I don't care. I have nothing to say to the Duke. He said you might be difficult. The messenger looked pained. He also said to tell you it concerns your sister's welfare and that if you refuse, he'll simply come here himself. He thought you might prefer to keep this meeting private. The threat was clear. Dorian Hale showing up at St. Catherine's would draw attention, raise questions, potentially cause problems for the refuge. Alara snatched the letter from the messenger's hand. Fine, I'll come. But tell him this is the first and last time he summons me like a servant. The messenger actually smiled. He said you'd say something like that too. Alara arrived at Ashford Estate 2 hours later, having changed into her least worn dress and pinned her hair into something resembling respectability. The estate was even more imposing up close, all stone and heritage and old money carefully preserved. A servant showed her to a study where Dorian sat behind a massive desk, reviewing papers. He looked up when she entered, his expression unreadable. Thank you for coming. I didn't have much choice, did I? Your message made that clear. I could have been less polite about it. You could have not summoned me at all. Dorian set down his pen. Your sister is fine, in case you were wondering. Healthy, adequately comfortable in her new circumstances. Adequately comfortable. How romantic. I never promised romance. No, you just promised cold formality for the rest of her life. Congratulations on delivering exactly that. Alara crossed her arms. Why am I here? If you wanted to gloat about successfully purchasing a wife, I want to hire you. That stopped her mid-sentence. What? I want to hire you, Dorian repeated calmly, for a project I've been considering. I understand you have experience working with disadvantaged populations through your charity work. Alara just stared at him. I own several properties in the city that are currently underutilized, he continued. I've been researching the possibility of converting one into a more substantial refuge, something larger and better equipped than the operation you currently volunteer at. I need someone who understands the actual needs of such an institution. Someone who won't romanticize poverty or treat charity like a hobby. Your name was suggested. By who? Your sister, actually. She's been reviewing my various holdings and made the recommendation. That knocked Alara off balance. Celestine suggested me? She speaks highly of your work. She believes you have valuable insight I would benefit from. Dorian's expression remained neutral. I'm inclined to trust her judgment. Alara struggled to process this. You want me to help you start a charity? I want you to help me create something sustainable and useful. Not a vanity project, but an actual functioning institution that addresses real needs. He pulled out a folder. I have capital, property, and resources. You have experience and understanding of what's actually required. It seems a logical partnership. A partnership? Alara's laugh was sharp. Like your marriage? Another transaction where you trade money for what exactly? A clear conscience? Dorian's eyes went cold. I'm offering you a chance to actually make a difference instead of just mourning injustice in a converted warehouse. If you'd rather feel morally superior than actually help people, that's your choice. The words echoed what Mrs. Brennan had said so precisely that Alara wondered if they'd somehow coordinated. Why? She asked finally. Why do this? You don't strike me as the charitable type. I'm not. But I am practical. And practically speaking, letting half my city's population starve or turn to crime is bad for everyone, including me. This is enlightened self-interest, not altruism. At least you're honest about your motivations. I'm always honest about my motivations. It's one of my few virtues. They stared at each other across the desk, Alara trying to find the trap, Dorian waiting with that infinite cold patience. Finally, Alara said, I want full control over the design and operation of this refuge. No interference from you beyond funding. Unacceptable. It's my property and money. I maintain approval over major decisions. Then find someone else. I could, but your sister believes you're the right person for this, and I trust her judgment more than I trust my own in this particular area. That was the first time Alara had heard him express anything resembling respect for Celestine. It softened something in her chest despite her best efforts. I want to see my sister, she said. Before I agree to anything, I want to confirm she's actually all right. She's in the library, has been most of the day, actually. She's reorganizing my entire collection. Something that might have been amusement flickered across his face. Apparently, my previous system offended her sense of order. I want to see her alone. Of course. Dorian stood. I'll have someone show you there. Take whatever time you need. We can discuss the refuge project afterward, if you choose to continue this conversation. He was giving her an out. Alara realized that with some surprise. He'd made his offer, but he wasn't pressuring her to accept. It was the first genuinely decent thing she'd seen him do. All right, she said, show me to the library. Celestine looked up when Alara entered, and her face transformed with genuine joy. Alara, I didn't know you were coming. Neither did I until 2 hours ago. Alara crossed the library, a massive room that smelled of old books and polish, and hugged her sister fiercely. Are you all right? Really all right? I'm fine. Celestine pulled back, and she did look fine. Maybe even better than fine. There was color in her cheeks and a calmness Alara hadn't seen in months. Better than I expected, honestly. Really? Really? Celestine gestured at the books surrounding them. This is my project. Dorian's family collected books for generations but never organized them properly. I've been cataloging everything, creating a real system. She smiled self-consciously. It's actually quite satisfying. And Dorian? Is he cold? Distant? Exactly what he promised to be? Celestine's smile didn't fade. Yes, but also fair, respectful. He listens when I speak. He values my opinions on estate management. He's teaching me about his business holdings. It's not love, Alara, but it's not the prison you imagined either. Alara wanted to feel relieved. She did feel relieved, but also confused. He offered me a job, she said. I know. I suggested it. Celestine took her hand. You've been so angry about this marriage, and I understand why. But maybe this can be something good that comes from it. You could help build something real, something that matters. Working for the man I called a monster 3 weeks ago? Working with him, Celestine corrected. And maybe discovering he's more complicated than you initially thought. I still don't like him. You don't have to like him. You just have to work with him. Celestine squeezed her hand. Please, Alara, try. For me, if nothing else. Alara looked at her sister, married for barely a week, already adapted to this new life in ways Alara hadn't expected. Celestine had always been good at that, she realized, at taking whatever situation she was handed and making something workable out of it. Maybe that was its own kind of strength. "All right," Alara said finally. "I'll try. But if he turns out to be as awful as I think he is, then you can say I told you so and quit." Celestine smiled. "Deal?" "Deal." When Alara returned to the study, Dorian was exactly where she'd left him, still reviewing papers as if he'd barely noticed her absence. "I'll do it," Alara said, without preamble. "I'll help with your refuge project, on the condition that I have meaningful input on every aspect and that you actually listen instead of just pretending to while doing whatever you plan to do anyway." Dorian looked up, and for just a moment, something that might have been approval crossed his face. "Acceptable," he said. "We'll start reviewing potential properties tomorrow. Be here at 9. 9 in the morning? Yes. Is that a problem? I work at St. Catherine's in the mornings. Then arrange your schedule differently. This is a professional commitment, Miss Vance. I expect you to treat it as such." Alara's hands clenched. This was a mistake. She could already tell this was going to be a disaster, but she'd promised Celestine she'd try. "Fine," she said through gritted teeth. 9 o'clock, tomorrow. Excellent. Dorian returned to his papers, dismissing her without another word. Alara left Ashford Estate feeling like she'd just agreed to something far more complicated than a simple business arrangement. She was absolutely right. The first property Dorian showed her was a former textile factory in Whitechapel that smelled like death and looked worse. "This is what you consider suitable?" Alara stood in the center of the cavernous space, staring up at a ceiling with more holes than plaster. Morning light streamed through gaps in the roof, illuminating dust motes and what might have been rat droppings, or bat droppings. Hard to tell. It has potential. Dorian walked the perimeter with a surveyor's eye, seemingly unbothered by the decay. Solid foundation. Good location near the docks where most of the workforce congregates. Large enough to house 50 comfortably, maybe 75 if we're efficient. It's a death trap. It's structurally sound. My architect confirmed it yesterday. Your architect is either blind or lying to keep you happy. Alara kicked at a loose floorboard which immediately gave way. Look at this. One heavy snow and the whole roof comes down. You'd kill everyone you were trying to save. Then we fix the roof, and the walls, and the floor, and the plumbing that I'm guessing doesn't exist, and the heating system that definitely doesn't exist. She turned to face him. This isn't a renovation project. This is a complete rebuild disguised as charity. Dorian pulled out a notebook, made a notation. Your objections are noted. What would you suggest instead? Something that doesn't require demolishing and reconstructing from scratch? Maybe a building that was actually designed for human habitation? Those cost significantly more. And saving money by housing people in a glorified barn is better? They stared at each other across the ruined factory floor. This had been the pattern for 3 days now. Dorian would suggest something practical and cost-effective. Alara would point out why it was actually terrible, they'd argue. Nothing would get resolved. It was exhausting and infuriating and somehow oddly energizing. The next property is in Southwark, Dorian said finally, closing his notebook. Former coaching inn, smaller capacity but in better condition. Why didn't we start with that one? Because it costs 3 times as much and I wanted to see if you could be practical about budgets. And instead you discovered I won't compromise on not killing people. How disappointing for you. Something that might have been amusement flickered across Dorian's face. The carriage is waiting. The coaching inn was better, not perfect. It needed work, new windows, updated kitchen facilities, better insulation, but it was actual shelter rather than a creative interpretation of the concept. Alara walked through the rooms, mentally cataloging what could work and what needed changing. The dormitory space is too open, she said, standing in what had been the inn's main common room. People need privacy, especially women. You can't just pack everyone into one big room and call it adequate. Partitions can be installed. Actual walls would be better, with doors that lock. Dorian made another note. That adds to the cost. Everything adds to the cost. That's what happens when you try to do something properly instead of cheaply. Alara moved to the windows, testing the frames. Rotted, of course. You said you wanted something sustainable, something real. That requires actual investment, not just throwing money at the cheapest option and hoping it works. I'm aware of that. I'm also aware that unlimited budgets don't exist, even for dukes. He came to stand beside her, looking out at the street below. You think I'm being miserly. I think you're being impractical. The truth is probably somewhere in between. It was the first reasonable thing he'd said all week. The location is good, Ilara admitted. Close enough to the markets that people can find work. Far enough from the worst areas that it's relatively safe. The structure is sound. If we do it right, proper walls, decent beds, a real kitchen, space for education and training, this could actually work. Then we're agreed? On the building, yes. On everything else? She turned to face him. We haven't even discussed how this place will actually operate, who runs it, what rules apply, how people qualify for help. Those details matter just as much as the building itself, which is why I hired you, to handle those details. You didn't hire me. You strong-armed me into this because my sister suggested it. Semantics. Dorian checked his pocket watch. I have meetings this afternoon. Review the property. Make a list of necessary modifications. Budget your requirements. We'll discuss it tomorrow. Tomorrow I'm at St. Catherine's all day. Then the day after. I'm not your employee to be scheduled at your convenience. Dorian looked at her with that cold, assessing gaze. No, you're my partner in this venture, which means your time is just as valuable as mine and just as limited. So we coordinate schedules like adults and make this work, or we don't do it at all. Your choice. He left before she could formulate a response. Ilara spent another hour at the coaching inn, measuring rooms in her head, imagining how the space could be transformed. Despite her frustration with Dorian's penny-pinching and autocratic scheduling, she could see it, a real refuge. A place that didn't just warehouse desperate people, but actually helped them rebuild. The possibility of it made her chest ache. When she finally returned to St. Catherine's that evening, Mrs. Brennan took one look at her face and laughed. That good, is it? I don't want to talk about it. You're working with him every day and you don't want to talk about it? He's impossible, controlling. He treats every conversation like a business negotiation. Ilara grabbed a broom and started sweeping with unnecessary force. He's exactly as cold as I thought he'd be. And yet you keep showing up. Because Celestine asked me to. And because the project itself is actually worthwhile, even if working with him is like pulling teeth. Mrs. Brennan settled into a chair, watching Ilara attack the floor. Does he listen? When you object to something, does he hear you? Ilara paused mid-sweep. Yes. Unfortunately. He argues, but he listens. He's taken notes on every single complaint I've made. I think he actually plans to address them. So he's impossible, controlling, and cold, but he also respects your expertise and acts on your feedback. Don't what? Don't try to make him sound reasonable. He's not. He's just... Ilara struggled for the right word. He's just doing what serves his purposes like he does with everything. Including marrying your sister to save your family from ruin? That hit harder than it should have. That's different, Ilara said, but her voice lacked conviction. Is it? Or are you determined to hate him because it's easier than admitting he might be more complicated than you want him to be? Before Ilara could respond, the door banged open. A boy of maybe 8 burst in, wild-eyed and bleeding from a cut above his eyebrow. Please, he gasped. Please, my sister. They took her. The men from the factory. She didn't come home, and I heard her screaming and... Ilara dropped the broom and was moving before she'd fully processed what he'd said. Slow down. What's your name? What's... Tommy Fletcher? My sister works at the match factory and she didn't come home tonight, and I went looking and I heard her crying in the foreman's office, and the door was locked and... Match factory. Foreman's office. Locked door. Girl crying. Ilara's blood went cold. Mrs. Brennan, she said, voice steady despite the rage building in her chest. Stay with Tommy, clean that cut. I'm going to... You're not going anywhere alone, Mrs. Brennan said sharply. If what he's describing is what I think it is, which is exactly why someone needs to go now. Ilara was already grabbing her coat. Before it gets worse. Then take James with you, or wait until we can get the constable. The constable? Ilara's laugh was bitter. You think they care what happens to factory girls. By the time we got anyone official involved, she'd be gone or dead or so broken it wouldn't matter anyway. She was out the door before Mrs. Brennan could stop her. The match factory loomed against the evening sky like a monument to misery. Alara had been here before, delivering food to workers during their insufficient lunch breaks, trying to document the conditions for reform groups that never seemed to actually reform anything. She knew which doors were usually unlocked, which supervisors looked the other way for the right incentive, which foremen had a reputation for taking liberties with the younger girls. She slipped in through the loading dock, moving fast through corridors that reeked of phosphorus and desperation. Voices echoed from somewhere deeper in the building, men laughing, a girl's muffled sobs. The foreman's office was at the end of a hallway. Light showed under the door. Alara could hear them inside, rough male voices, pleading female ones, the sound of furniture scraping. She didn't think, didn't plan, just grabbed the nearest thing that could serve as a weapon, a piece of pipe left by the wall, and kicked the door open. 3 men, one girl who couldn't have been more than 15, dress torn, face streaked with tears and terror, the foreman with his hand on her arm, 2 other men blocking the door, until Alara blocked it instead. "Get away from her," Alara said, voice steady despite her hammering heart. The foreman, a thick-necked man named Sullivan with a reputation that preceded him, turned with an expression of genuine surprise. "The hell are you doing here?" "Leaving, with her." Alara kept the pipe visible. "Now!" Sullivan laughed. "You've got spine, I'll give you that, but you're out of your depth, sweetheart. This is private business." "Private business. Is that what you call trapping a child in your office?" "She came here willingly." "Liar." The girl's voice was raw. "I came because you said I'd lose my job if I didn't. You said—" "Shut up." Sullivan's hand tightened on her arm, hard enough to make her gasp. Alara took a step forward. "Last chance. Let her go or I start screaming loud enough to bring the whole factory running, and then we'll see how willing everyone thinks she was." "No one's going to believe a charity worker over me." "Maybe not. But they'll believe her brother when he tells them how he found his sister, how she's bruised and crying, how you 3 were in here with the door locked." Alara's grip tightened on the pipe. "I don't need them to convict you. I just need them to question you, to make enough noise that your employer hears about it. Think he'll appreciate the attention?" Sullivan's face went ugly. "You stupid—" The door behind Alara opened. She spun, pipe raised, ready to fight whoever else was coming to make this worse. Dorian Hale stood in the doorway. For a frozen moment, no one moved. Dorian's gaze swept the room, took in the girl, the 3 men, Alara with her improvised weapon, and his expression went to absolute zero. "Miss Vance," he said quietly, "step aside." "I'm handling this. Step aside." Something in his voice made her obey without thinking. She moved to the side, keeping the pipe ready as Dorian entered the office. He looked at Sullivan the way you'd look at something you found on the bottom of your shoe. "You're the foreman here?" Sullivan puffed up, trying to regain authority. "I am. And you're trespassing on private property. Both of you need to— I own this factory." Dorian's voice cut through Sullivan's bluster like a blade through silk. "I purchased it 6 months ago as part of a larger acquisition, which makes you my employee, which makes this my business." The color drained from Sullivan's face. "Your Grace, this isn't— she's just a worker who is bleeding and terrified while you and your friend stand between her and the door." Dorian's gaze shifted to the other 2 men. "Get out, now, before I have you arrested for assault." They ran. Sullivan tried one more time. "Your Grace, if you just let me explain—" "You're dismissed, effective immediately. You have 5 minutes to collect your personal belongings and leave this property. If I ever see you at any facility I own, anywhere in this city, I will personally ensure you never work again. Am I clear?" Sullivan's mouth worked soundlessly. Then he fled. The girl collapsed against the desk, sobbing with relief. Alara moved to her side, wrapping her coat around shaking shoulders. "You're safe now. I'm going to take you somewhere safe. Your brother's waiting." "How did you know?" the girl whispered. "How did you know to come?" "Tommy told us. He's very brave, your brother." "He's 8. "I know." Alara helped her stand. "Which makes him even braver." Dorian had been standing by the door, giving them space. Now he spoke, his voice carefully controlled. "My carriage is outside. I'll have my driver take you both wherever you need to go." Alara looked up at him, seeing him clearly for maybe the first time. The cold exterior, the ruthless efficiency. But underneath, or maybe because of it, the willingness to use his power for something beyond his own benefit. "Thank you," she said. Something shifted in his expression. "Don't thank me for basic decency." "I'm not. I'm thanking you for showing up." She paused. "How did you know to come here?" "Mrs. Brennan sent her assistant to Ashford Estate after you left. She thought you might need backup." She was right. She usually is. They got the girl, her name was Annie, to the carriage along with Tommy, who attached himself to his sister like a barnacle. Dorian gave the driver instructions to take them to St. Catherine's, then turned to Alara. "You're an idiot," he said flatly. "Excuse me?" "Coming here alone, armed with a pipe, against 3 grown men." His voice was very calm and very cold. "You could have been killed, but I wasn't. Through luck, not judgment. What exactly was your plan if they decided to deal with you the same way they were planning to deal with Annie?" "I would have handled it." "With a piece of pipe and righteous anger, against 3 men twice your size?" He stepped closer, and there was something dangerous in his stillness. "You risked your life for someone you didn't know based on the word of a terrified child. That's not bravery, that's recklessness. What was I supposed to do? Wait for the authorities who don't care? Fill out proper forms while she was being assaulted? You were supposed to not throw yourself into danger without backup or plan. Why do you care?" The words burst out before Alara could stop them. "Why do you care what happens to me? I'm just the difficult sister, the one who called you a monster. Why does it matter to you if I'm reckless?" Dorian went very still. When he spoke, his voice was quiet and precise. "Because your sister would be devastated if something happened to you, and I don't want to see her hurt. Not because he cared about Alara, because he cared about Celestine. It shouldn't have stung. It did anyway." "Of course," Alara said. "How practical of you. Practicality keeps people alive. Romance gets them killed." He stepped back, putting distance between them. "The factory needs a new foreman, someone who won't abuse the workers. You clearly have opinions on labor conditions. I want recommendations on my desk by Friday. You want me to help you run your factory? I want you to help me run it properly, unless you'd prefer to keep staging dramatic rescues instead of preventing the need for them in the first place." He was right. Alara hated that he was right. "Fine," she said. "I'll send you names, but I want full authority to implement actual changes. Better wages, safer conditions, reasonable hours. Submit a detailed proposal and I'll review it." "Review it, not just implement it." "I don't make business decisions based on emotion. I make them based on evidence and sustainability." Dorian's gaze was steady. "Convince me your changes will improve productivity and worker retention, and I'll approve them. Appeal to my conscience, and I'll ignore you." "You don't have a conscience." "Exactly. Which is why you'll need to make a business case." They stared at each other across the darkening street. Alara wanted to hate him, wanted to see him as the cold, heartless aristocrat she'd labeled him as from the start. But he dropped everything to come here, had dismissed a foreman on the spot, was offering her actual power to make changes. It was confusing and frustrating, and not at all what she'd expected. "I should get back to St. Catherine's," she said finally. "Make sure Annie and Tommy are settled. My driver will take you. I can walk. It's dark and you just made enemies of at least 3 dangerous men. Take the carriage." It wasn't a request. Alara took the carriage. When she arrived back at St. Catherine's, Annie was wrapped in blankets and drinking tea, while Tommy refused to leave her side. Mrs. Brennan looked up as Alara entered, relief flooding her face. "Thank the stars. I was about to organize a search party. I'm fine. Annie's fine. Sullivan's fired and banned from every property Dorian owns." Alara sank into a chair, suddenly exhausted. "Crisis averted. The Duke came through?" "He did." Alara rubbed her face. "I don't understand him. He's cold and controlling and treats everything like a transaction, but then he shows up and does the right thing without hesitation. Maybe he's both." "Both what?" "Cold and decent. Controlling and reliable. People contain multitudes, Alara. They're not just one thing." "He said I was an idiot for coming here alone." Mrs. Brennan snorted. "You were an idiot for coming here alone. That doesn't mean it wasn't the right thing to do." "He wants me to submit a business proposal for factory reforms. Make a case based on productivity and profit instead of basic human decency. So make the case. You know it's possible to do right by workers and still run a profitable business. Prove it to him. Alara looked at Annie, who was starting to doze against her brother's shoulder. I don't know if I can work with him. He makes me so angry. Good. Angry people change things. Complacent people accept them. Mrs. Brennan stood, moving to check on their young guests. Use that anger. Build something real. Stop wasting energy on hating him and start using that energy to prove him wrong about whatever it is you think he's wrong about. It was annoyingly good advice. Over the next 2 weeks, Alara threw herself into the factory proposal with a vengeance. She documented current conditions: 12-hour days, poverty wages, children as young as 9 working with dangerous chemicals, accident rates that would make anyone with a conscience weep. Then she researched factories that had implemented reforms: reduced hours leading to increased productivity, better wages leading to reduced turnover, safety improvements leading to fewer costly accidents. She built a case that was airtight, backed by numbers and evidence, stripped of emotional appeal. It hurt to write it that way, to reduce human suffering to line items and cost-benefit analyses, but Dorian had been clear. He wanted business logic. She'd give him business logic that would choke him. When she presented it to him in his study at Ashford Estate, he read through all 40 pages without comment. Alara sat across from him, hands clenched in her lap, trying not to fidget. Finally, he looked up. This is good work. It's sound business. That's what you wanted. It is. I'm approving implementation at the match factory immediately. If the results match your projections after 6 months, we'll expand to my other manufacturing holdings. Alara blinked. Just like that? You're not going to argue or negotiate, or you made a compelling case. I don't argue with compelling cases. He set the proposal aside. You also worked in several recommendations that have nothing to do with productivity and everything to do with basic human welfare. The injury compensation fund, the literacy classes, the childcare provisions. You said you wanted evidence-based recommendations. I did. And you provided evidence that treating workers well improves retention and reduces training costs. The fact that it also improves their lives is merely a side benefit. His mouth quirked slightly. Well played. I wasn't playing. No, you were fighting, for people who can't fight for themselves, using my own requirements as weapons. That slight quirk deepened into something that might have been a smile. I respect that. It was the closest thing to a compliment Alara had ever received from him. She didn't know what to do with it. The coaching inn renovations are proceeding, Dorian continued, pulling out another file. I've hired the contractors you recommended. They estimate 8 weeks for completion if we avoid delays. 8 weeks? Alara leaned forward. That's faster than I expected. I'm paying extra for speed. The need is urgent. He slid a set of architectural drawings across the desk. These are the proposed modifications based on your specifications. Private rooms, reinforced walls, updated kitchen, separate facilities for families versus single occupants, classroom space, medical room. Alara studied the drawings, her heart beating faster. It was real. Actually real. Not just talk, but concrete plans, actual construction, something that would exist in the world. This is good, she said quietly. This is really good. The operating budget is outlined here. He passed her another document. I need you to start hiring staff, a director, cooks, night supervisors, teachers for the education programs, people who understand the population they're serving. That's a lot of responsibility. It's your project. You should control it. I thought you wanted approval over major decisions. I do. Hiring qualified staff is your decision. Spending beyond budget is mine. He pulled out his pocket watch, checked the time. Celestine mentioned you haven't joined us for dinner since the wedding. She'd like you to come tonight. The subject changed through her. I don't want to intrude. Your family, it's not an intrusion. I'm the sister who called you cold and ruthless. You were accurate. That doesn't make you unwelcome. He stood, closing the meeting. 7 o'clock, don't be late. It wasn't a request. Nothing with Dorian was ever really a request. Dinner at Ashford Estate was a formal affair, multiple courses, more silverware than seemed necessary, servants moving silently through rooms designed to intimidate. Alara wore the nicest dress she owned and still felt underdressed. Celestine lit up when she arrived. Alara, I'm so glad you came. I've been wanting to hear about the refuge project. Dorian says you've been working wonders. Dorian exaggerates. I don't exaggerate, Dorian said from the head of the table. I simply state facts. They settled into this meal. Roasted duck, potatoes in some kind of cream sauce, vegetables Alara couldn't identify but tasted expensive. The conversation flowed around neutral topics. Books Celestine was cataloging, a horse Dorian was considering purchasing, the upcoming social season. Then Celestine said, I heard about what happened at the match factory, how you rescued that girl. Alara nearly choked on her wine. How did you? Annie's mother works in our kitchens. She came to me this morning to express her gratitude. Celestine's expression was complicated. She said you risked your life to save her daughter. I did what needed doing. Alone, against 3 men, without thinking about the consequences. There wasn't time to think. If I'd waited, you could have been killed. Celestine's voice shook slightly. Alara, I know you want to help people, but you can't save everyone, especially not if you're dead. Better than doing nothing while someone suffers. That's noble and stupid in equal measure. Dorian cleared his throat. If I may interject, I've already lectured Miss Vance on her reckless tendencies, extensively. I don't believe repetition will improve the message. Then what will? Celestine turned to her husband. She throws herself into danger like it's a hobby. Someone needs to make her see sense. Actually, Dorian said slowly, I think someone needs to give her the resources to do what she's trying to do more safely, which is why I've arranged for her to have access to a legal advocate and 2 former soldiers who specialize in security work. If she insists on rescuing people, she should at least have proper backup. Alara stared at him. You hired me bodyguards? I hired you resources. What you do with them is your decision. I don't need bodyguards. You need something. Last week proved that. His gaze was steady. You're doing necessary work, work that will inevitably put you in difficult situations. Having people who can help extract you from those situations seems prudent. Prudent for who? For everyone involved, including my wife, who shouldn't have to worry about her sister getting murdered in a factory. It was the first time he'd referred to Celestine as his wife, with anything resembling actual concern. Celestine noticed, too. Her expression softened, something warm flickering in her eyes. Thank you, she said quietly to Dorian, for thinking of that. It's practical. But his voice was less cold than usual. The dinner continued, but something had shifted. Alara watched her sister and Dorian interact. Small courtesies, quiet communication, a partnership that was functioning better than she'd expected. It wasn't love, but it wasn't nothing either. After dessert, Celestine excused herself to check on something with the housekeeper. Alara found herself alone with Dorian in the drawing room, both of them nursing brandy in uncomfortable silence. She seems happy, Alara said finally, happier than I expected. She's capable, intelligent, good at managing complex systems. Dorian stared into his glass. I wasn't lying when I said I don't do romance, but I can recognize competence and appreciate it. Is that your version of affection? Appreciating competence? It's honest, which is more than most marriages can claim. But is it enough? You'd have to ask Celestine that, not me. Alara studied him, this cold, controlled man who'd fired a foreman on the spot, hired her bodyguards, approved her factory reforms without argument, who treated his wife with respect, if not warmth, who seemed genuinely incapable of expressing emotion, but not incapable of decent action. I misjudged you, she said suddenly. Not completely. You're still cold and autocratic and impossible to work with, but you're not what I thought you were. When we first met, what did you think I was? A monster buying a wife? And now? Now I think you're a man who doesn't know how to connect with people, so you use power and money instead. It's not better exactly, but it's different. Dorian was quiet for a long moment. My father was brutal. Not physically. He was too controlled for that, but emotionally. Every weakness was exploited, every vulnerability punished. Caring about anything meant giving him a weapon to use against you, so I learned not to care, or at least not to show it. He set down his glass. I know that makes me cold. I know it makes me difficult, but it's kept me alive and functional in a world that devours anyone who shows softness. It was the most personal thing he'd ever said to her. Alara didn't know what to do with it. I'm sorry, she said finally, for what he did to you. Don't be. It made me strong. It made you isolated. That's not the same thing. Isn't it? He stood, preparing to end the conversation. Your sister is the first person I've allowed close in a very long time. That should tell you how much I value her, even if I can't express it the way you think I should. He left before Alara could respond. She sat in the drawing room for a long time, thinking about monsters and men and the distance between what people were and what they showed the world. The next morning, she arrived at the Coaching Inn construction site to find organized chaos. Workers everywhere, materials being hauled, walls going up with efficiency that suggested Dorian had paid very well indeed for speed. She spent the day consulting with contractors, approving modifications, making decisions about layouts and facilities. It felt real. It felt possible. She was reviewing kitchen specifications when someone cleared their throat behind her. Two men stood there, one in his 40s, solid and weathered with the bearing of someone who'd seen combat. The other younger, maybe 30, with sharp eyes and ready hands. Both looked competent and dangerous in equal measure. Miss Vance? The older one said. I'm Garrett. This is Cole. The Duke hired us to provide security support for your activities. The bodyguards. Of course. I don't need— Yes, you do, Garrett interrupted calmly. No offense, miss, but we've reviewed the incident at the match factory. You got lucky. Next time you might not. We're here to make sure there is a next time. I can take care of myself. Can you? Against multiple assailants, armed men, situations that escalate beyond what a piece of pipe can handle? His expression was kind but firm. We're not here to control you. We're here to keep you alive while you do what you're doing. There's a difference. Cole spoke for the first time, his voice quieter. My sister worked in a factory like that one. Didn't make it out. If you're going to help people like her, I want to make sure you survive long enough to actually do it. The raw honesty in his voice stopped Alara's protests. All right, she said finally, but you follow my lead. If I say we go, we go. If I say someone needs help, we help them. Deal? Deal, Garrett said, as long as you don't do anything stupidly suicidal. I make no promises. Fair enough. Over the following weeks, a pattern emerged. Alara would hear about situations, girls trapped, workers abused, children endangered, and she'd go. But now she went with backup. Garrett and Cole proved worth their weight in gold, intimidating enough to make bad actors think twice, capable enough to extract people from dangerous situations, smart enough to know when to push and when to retreat. They rescued a seamstress from a brothel, extracted a boy from a chimney sweep who worked him to the bone, confronted a landlord who'd locked families out in winter. Each time, Alara felt the weight of what Dorian had given her, not just muscle, but the ability to act without risking everything. She hated being grateful to him. She was grateful anyway. The refuge neared completion. Alara hired staff carefully, people who'd lived the struggles they'd be helping others survive. A former factory worker as director. A woman who'd escaped an abusive marriage to run the women's wing. Teachers who understood that learning was harder when you were hungry and scared. One evening, reviewing final details in Dorian's study, she found herself actually enjoying the work. Not just the outcome, but the process. The way Dorian would listen to her suggestions and push back where they didn't make sense, forcing her to refine her thinking. The way he'd approve things without praise, but also without unnecessary criticism. The efficiency of working with someone who valued results over ego. You're smiling, Dorian observed. I'm not. You were. Just now. While reviewing the staffing budget. I was thinking about how much good we can do once this is operational. We. He repeated the word carefully. Not you despite me, or me if you don't interfere. We. Alara realized she'd said it without thinking. I suppose so. This is a partnership, isn't it? Even if it's an irritating one. Irritating but functional. Something that might have been approval crossed his face. I'll accept that. That night, Celestine cornered her in the hallway as she was leaving. He talks about you, Celestine said without preamble. What? Dorian. He talks about the refuge project, your proposals, how you challenge him. Celestine's smile was knowing. He doesn't talk about people, not like that. You've gotten under his skin. I've annoyed him, that's different. Is it? Because he seems energized lately, more engaged, like he's found something worth his attention beyond just business. That's the project, not me. Keep telling yourself that. Celestine hugged her. I'm glad you two are working together. I'm glad you're giving him a chance. He needs people who see past the cold exterior. And what do they find when they see past it? Someone worth knowing, if you're brave enough to keep looking. Alara thought about that on the ride home, thought about the man who'd shown up at the factory, who'd hired her protection without being asked, who listened and argued and approved and pushed back and somehow made her better at the work she was doing. She still didn't like him, didn't trust the coldness or the control or the way he treated emotions like weaknesses. But Celestine might be right about one thing. He was worth knowing, even if knowing him was complicated and frustrating and occasionally infuriating. 2 days before the refuge was set to open, everything went to hell. Alara was at the site supervising final inspections when Garrett pulled her aside. We have a problem. What kind of problem? The kind where someone's been asking questions about your rescue operations. Specifically, someone connected to Sullivan, the foreman the Duke fired. Alara's stomach dropped. Asking what kind of questions? The kind that suggests they're building a case that you've been operating outside legal authority, interfering with private business, trespassing, possibly kidnapping. That's insane. We've been helping people. We've been extracting people from situations without proper legal backing. If they want to twist it, they can. Garrett's expression was grim. They're also spreading word in certain circles that you're trouble, that employers should be wary of anyone connected to you. They're trying to destroy my credibility. They're trying to destroy you, period. Make an example. Scare off anyone else who might try what you've been doing. Cole appeared, looking agitated. It's worse. They've contacted the police, filed formal complaints. There's talk of charges being brought. Alara's mind raced. Everything she'd built, the refuge, the rescue operations, the factory reforms, all of it could crumble if she ended up in legal trouble. Dorian's reputation could suffer by association. The people she'd helped could be re-victimized to prove a point. I need to talk to Dorian, she said. Now. She found him at Ashford Estate, in his study as always. He looked up as she burst in without knocking, took one look at her face, and went very still. What happened? She told him. All of it. The threats, the legal complaints, the campaign to discredit her. Dorian listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Marry me." Alara's brain short-circuited. What? Marry me. Become my wife. Take the Ashford name and all the legal protection that comes with it. His voice was completely calm, like he was proposing a business merger rather than marriage. They can't touch you if you're a duchess. The legal complaints become significantly more complicated when leveled against nobility. Your rescue operations gain legitimacy under my authority. Your reputation becomes unassailable. You're insane. I'm practical. They're using the law as a weapon against you. I'm offering you a shield. You're already married to my sister. Who would understand better than anyone why this is necessary? He stood, moving around the desk. Alara, think. They're coming for you because you're vulnerable. Make yourself invulnerable. By committing bigamy? By destroying Celestine's marriage? Are you listening to yourself? Dorian's jaw tightened. I'm listening to reality. You have two choices. Fight this legal battle and likely lose everything you've built, or accept protection that makes the battle irrelevant. Those aren't my only choices. Then tell me what others you see. Alara opened her mouth to answer and found she couldn't. Because he was right, she was vulnerable. The rescue operations existed in legal gray areas. Without resources or social standing, she'd be crushed. But his solution was impossible. I won't destroy my sister's marriage to save myself, she said finally. Find another way. There is no other way that works as quickly or as completely. Then I'll fight. I'll hire advocates, build a legal defense. Which takes time you don't have and money you don't possess. Dorian's voice went cold. This is not about pride or principle. This is about survival, and you're too stubborn to see it. I'm stubborn? You're suggesting I marry you when you're already married. I'm suggesting you accept reality instead of clinging to ideals that will get you destroyed. They were shouting now, standing too close, both of them furious and desperate and running out of options. The door opened. Celestine stood there, pale but composed. I heard raised voices. Neither Alara nor Dorian moved. Tell her, Dorian said to his wife. Tell her this is the logical solution. Tell her it's insane, Alara countered. Tell her I'd never ask you to… Stop! Celestine's voice cut through the chaos. She looked at Dorian, then at Alara, then back to Dorian. Both of you, stop. Silence fell. Celestine took a breath. There is another solution, one neither of you has considered because you're both too busy being dramatic. What solution? Alara asked. Celestine looked at her husband with an expression Alara couldn't read. An annulment. The word hung in the air like a grenade. No, Dorian said immediately. Absolutely not. Why not? We haven't… Celestine stopped, color rising in her cheeks. We haven't consummated the marriage. An annulment is legally possible. You marry Alara instead. The protection transfers. The family is still saved because you married Avant's daughter, just a different one. Celestine? Alara started. It makes sense. Celestine's voice was steady despite the pain in her eyes. You and Dorian work well together. You challenge each other. You've built something real with this refuge project. I've been useful as your wife, but Alara could be more than that. She could be your actual partner. I don't want this, Alara said desperately. Celly, I never wanted to take anything from you. You're not taking, I'm offering. Celestine smiled, and it broke Alara's heart. I know you think I settled for this marriage. Maybe I did. But I also know what I signed up for. A practical arrangement. No illusions. And now that arrangement can serve a different purpose, saving you instead of saving father's debts. That's worth something, isn't it? Not if it costs you everything. It costs me a marriage I never expected to be more than convenient. It saves you from legal destruction. The math isn't complicated, Alara. Dorian had gone very still, his face unreadable. Celestine, I can't ask you to. You're not asking. I'm choosing. She met his eyes. You've been a good husband, Dorian. Respectful, honest, exactly what you promised. But you and I both know this isn't what either of us actually wants long term. We function well together. But we'll never… She didn't finish. Didn't need to. Alara needs this more than I do, Celestine continued. And you need someone who fights you, who pushes back, who doesn't just accept your coldness but forces you to be better. That's not me. That's her. This is insane, Alara said again, but her voice had lost conviction, because underneath the insanity was a terrible logic. She and Dorian did work well together. They did challenge each other. And if the legal protection could save everything she'd built, think about it, Celestine said. Both of you, sleep on it. But do it quickly, because Alara is running out of time. She left. Alara and Dorian stood in the study, not looking at each other, both processing what had just happened. Finally, Dorian spoke. She's right. About the annulment being legally possible. About the protection transferring. About… He stopped. About us working well together. This is my sister's marriage you're talking about dissolving. It's her suggestion. Not mine, not yours. Hers. He turned to face her. If she's truly willing, if an annulment can be arranged quietly, if you accept, would you? Alara looked at him, really looked at him, saw the man who'd shown up at the factory, who'd hired her protection, who'd approved her reforms, who'd built something real alongside her, who was cold and controlled and impossible, but also capable of decent action when it mattered, who her sister was willingly offering to step aside from because she thought they worked better together. I don't know, Alara said honestly. I need to think. Think fast, Dorian said. Because Celestine's right about one thing. You're running out of time. Alara didn't sleep that night. She paced her small room at the Vance house until dawn painted the windows gray, her mind spinning through impossible calculations. Marry Dorian. Dissolve her sister's marriage. Accept protection she desperately needed but hadn't asked for. Become a duchess. Save everything she'd built. Destroy Celestine in the process. By the time the sun fully rose, she'd made her decision. She found Celestine in the morning room at Ashford Estate, reading correspondence with her usual methodical focus. Her sister looked up as Alara entered, and something sad flickered across her face. You're going to say no, Celestine said. It wasn't a question. I have to. Even if it means losing everything, the refuge, the rescue operations, your freedom, even then. Alara sat down across from her sister, taking her hands. Sally, I can't do this to you. I won't. You sacrificed yourself once to save this family. I'm not letting you do it again for me. What if I want to? Then I'm telling you no. Your wants don't get to include destroying your own life for mine. Celestine pulled her hands back, her expression hardening. You think you're being noble. You're being selfish. The words hit like a slap. Selfish. I'm trying to protect you. From what? From escaping a marriage I never wanted in the first place? Celestine stood, pacing to the window. You think I'm happy here? You think this arrangement with Dorian is fulfilling some dream I had? You said you were content. You said it was working. It's functional. That's not the same as happy. Celestine's voice cracked slightly. I wake up every day in a house full of beautiful things and empty spaces. I manage estates and budgets and social calendars. I'm useful. I'm respected. I'm slowly suffocating. Alara felt her chest constrict. You never said, what was I supposed to say? That I made a mistake? That I traded my freedom for security and found out security isn't enough? Celestine turned back to face her. You were right, Alara. That day in the parlor when he first came, you were right about all of it. This is a gilded cage, and I'm tired of pretending the bars don't exist. But you told me it was fine, because you were so angry about it, so convinced I'd made a terrible choice. I couldn't admit you were right. I couldn't face that I'd settled for this, and it wasn't even good settling. Celestine's composure was crumbling, tears building in her eyes. So I lied. To you, to myself. I convinced myself that useful was enough, that respect was a fair trade for affection, that I could build a life out of efficiency and good management. Celestine? But then I watched you and Dorian work together. I saw you fight with him and challenge him and refuse to let him be cold. I saw him actually engage with you in ways he never has with me. And I realized... She stopped, swallowing hard. I realized that's what partnership actually looks like. Not two people coexisting politely, but two people pushing each other to be better. Alara stood, moving to her sister. That doesn't mean you have to give up everything. I'm not giving up anything. Celestine's voice rose, frustration breaking through the careful control. I'm choosing something different. I'm choosing to step back from a marriage that was always a transaction and let it serve a purpose that actually matters. Saving you, letting you and Dorian build something real, giving myself the chance to find something more than just useful. And what happens to you after the annulment? I survive, same as always. Celestine wiped her eyes roughly. I'm a Vance. We're good at surviving. That's not enough. It's what we have. Celestine took a shaky breath. See, please, Alara, let me do this. Let me choose this one thing for myself instead of just accepting what's chosen for me. The words hung between them, heavy with years of duty and sacrifice and swallowed desires. I need to think, Alara said finally. I can't just... You have 2 days before the legal complaints are filed formally. After that, it becomes much harder to fight. Celestine's voice steadied. Think fast. Alara spent the day at St. Catherine's, throwing herself into work that didn't require impossible decisions. She helped prepare meals, taught reading to children who could barely keep their eyes open from exhaustion, listened to stories of struggle that made her own problems feel absurdly privileged. Mrs. Brennan found her in the kitchen that evening, scrubbing pots with unnecessary violence. Whatever you're fighting, those pots didn't do it. Alara didn't slow down. Celestine wants to annul her marriage so Dorian can marry me instead. She thinks it will solve my legal problems and free her from a marriage she never wanted. Dorian thinks it's practical. I think everyone's lost their minds. Mrs. Brennan was quiet for a long moment. What do you think? I think it's insane. I think asking my sister to sacrifice her marriage for me is wrong. I think... Alara stopped, the words catching. I think I'm terrified of what it means if I say yes. Terrified of what? Of failing. Of Celestine regretting it. Of marrying a man I don't love who doesn't love me and having it destroy everything anyway. She finally stopped scrubbing, her hands shaking. Of admitting that maybe everyone else is right and I'm the one being stubborn and stupid. Those are all reasonable fears. That's not helpful. I'm not here to be helpful. I'm here to ask the real question. Mrs. Brennan took the pot from Alara's hands. If Celestine is truly willing, and I mean truly, not guilt or pressure, but actual choice, and if this marriage could protect the work you're doing, the people you're helping, the refuge you've built, would you do it? I don't know. Yes, you do. You're just afraid of the answer. Alara met her eyes. Yes. If Celestine is truly willing, if it protects the work, if Dorian understands this is partnership, not possession. Yes, I would. Then tell them that. And if it's a mistake, then you'll survive it, same as you survive everything else. Mrs. Brennan smiled sadly. You can't live your whole life avoiding mistakes, child. Sometimes you have to make the choice that scares you and trust yourself to handle the consequences. That night, Alara returned to Ashford Estate and asked to speak with both Dorian and Celestine together. They met in the library, Celestine's domain, surrounded by the books she'd so carefully organized. Dorian stood by the fireplace, his expression unreadable. Celestine sat in an armchair, hands folded, waiting. I need ground rules, Alara said without preamble. If we do this, if I agree. Such as? Dorian asked. First, Celestine is protected. Financially, socially, completely. She gets a generous settlement, her own residence, full autonomy. This doesn't ruin her life. Agreed, Dorian said immediately. I'd already planned to ensure she was fully provided for. Second, the annulment is handled quietly. No scandal attached to Celestine's name. She walks away from this with her reputation intact. My solicitors are already drafting the documentation. It will be handled with complete discretion. Third, Alara turned to her sister. You have to be absolutely certain. Not doing this for me. Not doing this because you feel obligated. Actually choosing this for yourself. Celestine met her eyes steadily. I'm certain. If you change your mind at any point before the papers are signed, I won't. But if you do, Alara. Celestine stood, crossing to take her sister's hands. I'm not a martyr. I'm not sacrificing myself. I'm choosing freedom over security. I'm choosing possibility over certainty. For the first time in my life, I'm choosing something because I want it, not because it's expected or necessary. Please let me have this choice. Alara searched her sister's face, looking for doubt or fear or hidden resentment. Found only determination and something that looked like relief. All right, she said quietly. All right. Dorian moved forward, his voice carefully neutral. And your conditions for the marriage itself? Alara turned to face him. This is partnership, not ownership. I continue my work with the refuge and the rescue operations. You don't get to control my schedule or my choices. Agreed. With the caveat that you take reasonable precautions and accept the security I provide. Fine. Second condition, we're honest with each other. No games, no manipulation, no pretty lies to smooth things over. If this is going to work, it has to be built on truth. Something shifted in Dorian's expression. I wouldn't know how to lie to you anyway. You see through everything. Good. Keep it that way. Alara took a breath. Third condition, this doesn't have to be love, but it has to be respect. Real respect, not just polite tolerance. I already respect you. That's why I'm proposing this arrangement. Do you? Or do you just respect my usefulness? The question hung in the air, sharp and challenging. Dorian was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, I respect that you see problems I ignore and refuse to let them stay ignored. I respect that you fight for people who can't fight for themselves, even when it's reckless and dangerous. I respect that you challenged me from the first moment we met and haven't stopped since. He paused. And yes, I respect your usefulness, because useful people make the world better. That's not an insult. It wasn't love, but it was honest. All right, Alara said. Then I agree. We do this. Celestine let out a breath she'd been holding. Thank you. Don't thank me. I'm still not sure this isn't insane. It probably is, Dorian said, but insanity has served us well so far. The next 72 hours moved with brutal efficiency. Dorian's solicitors drew up annulment papers and settlement documents. Celestine signed without hesitation. The marriage was dissolved with the same cold precision it had been contracted, reduced to legal language and official seals. Alara watched her sister walk away from Ashford Estate with a small trunk of belongings and a bank draft that would keep her comfortable for life, and felt like she'd participated in an execution. She'll be fine, Dorian said quietly, standing beside her as the carriage pulled away. Better than fine. She has freedom now. Freedom I stole from her. Freedom she chose. There's a difference. Alara wanted to believe him. The wedding was scheduled for the following week, a rushed, private ceremony with minimal witnesses, necessary to establish legal protection before the formal complaints were filed. Margaret and Richard Vance were informed by letter, too late to object and too relieved by Celestine's settlement to cause problems. Rosalind and Seraphine sent confused congratulations. The ceremony itself was even more stark than Celestine's had been. No guests beyond the required witnesses, no reception, no pretense of celebration, just cold legal binding performed by a magistrate in his chambers, witnessed by Dorian's solicitor and Mrs. Brennan, who'd insisted on being present. Do you, Dorian Alexander Hale, take this woman? I do. Do you, Alara Margaret Vance, take this man? Alara looked at Dorian, saw the man who'd fired Sullivan on sight, who'd hired her bodyguards, who'd approved her reforms, who'd offered his name as a shield when she had nowhere else to turn, who was cold and controlled and impossible but also capable of showing up when it mattered. I do, she said, and meant it more than she'd expected to. The magistrate pronounced them married. No kiss this time. Just a brief handshake like they'd concluded a business deal, which in some ways they had. Well, Mrs. Brennan said as they left the chambers, that was romantic. It wasn't meant to be, Dorian replied. I know. That's what makes it sad. But Alara found herself disagreeing silently. There was something honest about the simplicity. No false promises, no performed emotions, just two people choosing partnership and calling it what it was. They returned to Ashford Estate, now her home, a thought that still felt surreal. Dorian showed her to rooms that had been prepared, larger and more luxurious than Celestine's had been. I had them decorated neutrally, he said. You can change anything you want. Why different rooms than Celestine had? Because you're not Celestine. This is a different arrangement. He paused in the doorway. The refuge opens tomorrow. I assume you want to be there. Of course. Then get some rest. Tomorrow will be demanding. He left her there, alone in rooms that smelled of fresh paint and furniture polish, surrounded by wealth she'd never wanted and protection she desperately needed. She was the Duchess of Ashford now. She had no idea what that actually meant. The refuge opened with less fanfare and more chaos than Alara had anticipated. People appeared almost immediately, word having spread through the desperate networks that survived on rumor and hope. A woman with 3 children and nowhere to go. 2 men who'd lost factory jobs and been evicted. A girl who'd run from something she wouldn't name but that had left bruises on her arms. The staff Alara had hired moved with efficient compassion, getting people settled, providing meals, asking gentle questions to assess needs. Within 6 hours, 20 people had been housed. Within 12, they were at capacity. We're going to need more space, the director, a former factory worker named Margaret Davies, said as the sun set. This is just the beginning. Word gets out that there's a real refuge, one that actually helps instead of just warehouses, and we'll have twice this many by next week. Then we'll find more space, Alara said. With what funding? Leave that to me. That night, she cornered Dorian in his study with projections and proposals for expanding capacity. He listened, asked pointed questions, then approved an additional building without argument. You're going to bankrupt yourself funding my projects, Alara said. Unlikely. I'm quite wealthy. He returned to his papers. Besides, these aren't charity. They're investments in social stability. Fewer desperate people means less crime, which benefits everyone, including my business holdings. You really can't just admit you're doing something good, can you? I'm doing something practical that happens to have beneficial effects. That's not the same as goodness. Keep telling yourself that. Something that might have been amusement crossed his face. How are the rooms? Acceptable? They're fine. Excessive, but fine. This is your home now. You're entitled to excessive. The word home caught her off guard. She'd been thinking of Ashford Estate as Dorian's territory, a place she was temporarily inhabiting. The idea that it might actually become home felt foreign. It doesn't feel real yet, she admitted. It will. Give it time. He set down his pen, giving her his full attention for the first time that evening. The legal complaints were officially withdrawn this afternoon. Sullivan and his associates received visits from my legal team explaining the consequences of pursuing harassment charges against a duchess. They've agreed to cease all actions. Relief flooded through her. It's over? The immediate threat is over. You'll need to be more careful going forward. But yes, for now, it's handled. Because I married you. Because you accepted protection. The marriage was simply the mechanism. He stood, moving to pour 2 glasses of brandy. We should discuss expectations for this arrangement. I thought we already had ground rules. We did. But ground rules aren't the same as day-to-day reality. He handed her a glass. I work long hours. I have business obligations, social commitments, political connections that require maintenance. As my wife, you'll be expected to participate in some of that. I'm not going to become some society ornament. I'm not asking you to. I'm asking you to show up at occasional dinners and not insult visiting dignitaries. He paused. Much. I'll try to restrain myself. That's all I ask. He returned to his desk. In exchange, you have complete freedom to run your refuge operations, your rescue work, whatever projects you deem necessary. I won't interfere unless you're about to do something spectacularly self-destructive. Define spectacularly. I'll know it when I see it. They fell into a rhythm over the following weeks that worked better than Alara had expected. Dorian would spend his days managing his various business interests. Alara would spend hers at the refuge, coordinating operations, handling crises, expanding programs. Evenings, they'd share dinner, discuss their respective work, occasionally argue about approach or philosophy. It wasn't intimacy, but it was partnership. Then Seraphine showed up at the refuge one afternoon, pale and shaking. Sarah? Alara dropped the supply inventory she'd been reviewing. What's wrong? It's Oliver. Seraphine's voice was barely a whisper. He's back. He wants to see me. Oliver, the fiancé who'd abandoned Seraphine when the Vance debts had surfaced, who'd broken her heart so thoroughly she'd barely functioned for months. Tell him no. I can't. He's at the house. He came to see Father. He says he made a mistake, that he still loves me, that he wants... Seraphine's breath hitched. He wants to resume the engagement. Alara felt cold fury building in her chest. After 2 years? After abandoning you when you needed him most? He thinks he can just show up and Father's encouraging it. Seraphine's eyes were wet. He says it's a good match, that Oliver's family has forgiven the scandal, that I should be grateful for a second chance. Grateful. Alara's hands clenched. He should be on his knees begging forgiveness, not acting like he's doing you a favor. Alara, I don't know what to do. Part of me I still remember how it felt before everything fell apart. How happy I was. That was before he proved he was too weak to stand by you. But what if he's changed? What if he really does regret it? Alara looked at her sister, beautiful, fragile Seraphine who'd been broken by trust that shattered under pressure, who was considering giving that same person another chance to break her. Do you want to see him? Alara asked carefully. I don't know, maybe. I keep thinking about what Celestine said, about choosing for yourself instead of just accepting what's decided for you. And what would you choose? I don't know. Seraphine's composure cracked completely. I don't trust my own judgment anymore. Everything I thought was real turned out to be conditional. How do I know what's real now? Alara pulled her sister into a hug, feeling the tremors running through her frame. You want me to talk to him? Find out if he's serious or just... Would you? Seraphine pulled back, hope and fear warring in her expression. Would you meet with him? See if he means it. Of course. That evening, Alara showed up at the Vance house, where Oliver was apparently staying as Richard's guest. She found him in the parlor, looking exactly as she remembered. Handsome in a conventional way, well-dressed, charming when he wanted to be. He stood when she entered, offering a polite bow. Miss Vance, or should I say, Your Grace, I heard about your marriage. Congratulations. Cut the pleasantries. Why are you here? Oliver's smile faltered slightly. I came to see Seraphine, to apologize for abandoning her when she needed you most, for proving your love was conditional on her family's financial stability, for breaking her so completely she could barely speak for months. I made a mistake. His voice was steady, but his eyes shifted. I was young. I panicked. I've regretted it every day since. Have you? Or did you just hear the Vance family is connected to the Duke of Ashford now and decide we might be worth the trouble after all? It's not about that, isn't it? 2 years of silence and suddenly you appear a month after I marry into wealth? That's quite a coincidence. Oliver's jaw tightened. I love Seraphine. I always have. I couldn't face the scandal, the debts, what it would mean for my family's reputation. So you're weak. Good to have that confirmed. I'm honest. About my limitations. About what I can and can't handle. He met her eyes directly. Isn't that better than lying about it? Your own husband married for practical reasons, not love. At least I'm admitting I'm flawed. My husband was honest about his limitations from the start. He didn't make promises he couldn't keep. You did. And I'm here to make amends. To try again. With honesty this time. Oliver stepped closer. I know I hurt her. I know I don't deserve another chance. But I'm asking anyway. If she'll have me, I'll spend the rest of my life proving I can be better than I was. Alara wanted to hate him completely. Wanted to see only the coward who'd abandoned Seraphine. But she could hear echoes of her own situation in his words. Partnerships built on honesty about limitations rather than false promises of perfection. If you hurt her again, Alara said quietly, I will destroy you. I don't care who your family is or what connections you have. I'll ruin you so thoroughly you'll wish you'd never heard the name Vance. I understand. Do you? Because I'm not making empty threats. I'm the Duchess of Ashford now. I have resources and power you can't imagine, and I will use every bit of it to bear you if you prove yourself unworthy again. I understand, Oliver repeated, and this time she heard actual fear under the words. Good. Alara turned to leave, then stopped. One more thing. You don't get to decide this. Seraphine does. If she tells you to leave, you leave. If she needs time, you wait. You don't pressure, you don't manipulate, you don't use father's support as leverage. Her choice, not yours. Clear? Clear. Alara reported the conversation to Seraphine that night, trying to be fair about Oliver's apparent sincerity while making her own doubts clear. Seraphine listened quietly, then said she needed time to think. 3 days later, she accepted Oliver's renewed courtship. Alara wanted to object, wanted to protect her sister from potential heartbreak. But she remembered Celestine's words about choosing for yourself, and she held her tongue. The refuge continued expanding. A second building was acquired, then a third. What had started as a single operation was becoming a network, shelters, job training programs, medical clinics, schools for children who'd never had access to education. Alara was reviewing expansion plans in Dorian's study one evening when he looked up from his own work and said, You're building an empire. I'm building a safety net. It amounts to the same thing. An organization this large requires infrastructure, governance, sustainable funding models. He pulled out a ledger. Have you thought about how this continues if something happens to you? Nothing's going to happen to me. You rescue people from dangerous situations regularly. Something could absolutely happen to you. His voice was carefully neutral, but something tighter lurked underneath. You need succession plans, legal structures that ensure the organization survives beyond individual leadership. Are you worried about me? I'm worried about the organization collapsing if you're incapacitated or killed. That's not what I asked. Dorian set down his pen, meeting her eyes directly. Yes, I'm worried about you. You take risks that make my security team age prematurely. You work yourself to exhaustion. You care so much about everyone else's welfare you neglect your own. So yes, I worry. It was the most emotion she'd heard from him that wasn't directed at business efficiency. I don't know how to stop, she admitted. There's always someone else who needs help. Always another crisis. If I slow down, people suffer. And if you burn out, they suffer more. Because you won't be there at all. He stood, crossing to where she sat. I'm not asking you to stop caring. I'm asking you to be strategic about it. Build systems that don't require your constant presence. Train others to do what you do. Make yourself replaceable so the work survives you. Make myself replaceable, she repeated. That's your version of caring? That's my version of keeping you alive. His voice dropped lower. I didn't marry you just for legal protection, Alara. I married you because you're the first person in years who's made me want to be part of something beyond my own interests. Watching you destroy yourself trying to save everyone would defeat the purpose." The admission hung between them, raw and unexpected. "I don't know how to be less than I am," Alara said quietly. "I'm not asking you to be less. I'm asking you to be smarter. There's a difference." Before she could respond, Garrett burst into the study without knocking, a violation of protocol that meant something was very wrong. "Your Grace, both of you, we have a problem." Alara was on her feet instantly. "What happened?" "Sullivan, he's taken a girl from the refuge, left a note saying, if you want her back, you'll meet him alone at the old mill district, tonight." The world tilted. How did he get into the refuge? Posed as someone's uncle. The night supervisor didn't verify. By the time anyone realized she was missing, he was gone. Dorian's face had gone to absolute zero. "Contact the police immediately. He says if we involve authorities, he kills her." Garrett's jaw was tight. "He wants revenge for being fired, for losing his reputation. He blames both of you, but especially Miss Her Grace." "How old is the girl?" Alara asked, her voice steady despite the ice in her veins. 13. Been at the refuge for 2 weeks, recovering from a factory accident that cost her 3 fingers. 13 years old, missing fingers, terrified and vulnerable, and now in the hands of a man who'd proven he had no limits. "I'm going," Alara said. "Absolutely not." Dorian's voice cut like steel. "That's exactly what he wants. To lure you out and punish you. And the alternative is leaving a 13-year-old girl with a violent predator? The alternative is letting my security team handle this professionally instead of walking into an obvious trap. Your security team doesn't know the mill district like I do, doesn't know the back ways, the hiding spots, the escape routes." Alara was already moving toward the door. "I'm going, with or without your permission." "Alara, Dorian grabbed her arm, stopping her. His grip was tight enough to hurt. "If you go alone, he'll kill you both. Use your head instead of your heart for once." "My head says a child is in danger and I can help. What does yours say?" "That you're being reckless and I'm not letting you die for it." They stared at each other, both furious, both terrified, both knowing the clock was ticking on a 13-year-old's life. "Then come with me," Alara said. "You, me, Garrett, Cole. We go together. We get her out. But we go now." Dorian's jaw worked. Then he released her arm and turned to Garrett. "Get the carriage. Full security protocols, and someone get the police positioned at a perimeter in case this goes wrong." The note said no police. I don't care what the note said. A perimeter. Far enough they won't be immediately visible, but close enough to respond. Move. Garrett moved. 20 minutes later, they were in a carriage racing toward the mill district, a decaying industrial area full of abandoned buildings and broken machinery. Dorian sat across from Alara, his expression unreadable, while Garrett and Cole rode outside armed and alert. "When we get there," Dorian said quietly, "you let me talk first. He wants me, which is exactly why I talk first. We don't give him what he wants immediately. We negotiate. We create openings." His eyes met hers. "And if things go wrong, you run. You don't try to be a hero. You run, and you let the security team handle it. I'm not leaving a child. You're not helping anyone dead, promise me. If I tell you to run, you run." Alara wanted to argue, saw the fear under his control and couldn't. "All right," she said, "I promise." The old mill loomed against the night sky like a broken tooth. Most of the windows were shattered, the roof partially collapsed. Machinery rusted in piles outside. It looked like the kind of place nightmares were made. They approached carefully. Garrett and Cole moved ahead, checking for immediate threats. Dorian kept Alara close, one hand on her arm. "Sullivan!" Dorian's voice echoed through the ruins. "We're here as requested. Release the girl." Silence. Then movement from inside the building. Sullivan appeared in a doorway, holding the girl by her upper arm. Even in the dim light, Alara could see the terror on the child's face. "Your Grace," Sullivan called out, his voice mocking. "How kind of you to join us. And you brought the troublemaker. Perfect." "Release her," Dorian repeated. "Whatever grievance you have, it's with us, not a child. That's where you're wrong. She's from the refuge, the place that only exists because your wife couldn't mind her own business." Sullivan's grip tightened, making the girl whimper. "Everything I lost, my job, my reputation, my livelihood, because she had to play hero. You lost those things because you were assaulting workers, Alara said, her voice carrying across the space. I didn't create your crimes. I just exposed them. You destroyed me. You destroyed yourself. I just made sure everyone knew it. Sullivan's face twisted with rage. You think you're so righteous, so much better than everyone else. Let's see how righteous you feel when I... He didn't finish. Cole had been circling during the conversation, moving through shadows. He struck from behind, a clean, precise movement that sent Sullivan stumbling forward. The girl broke free, running toward them. Garrett scooped her up, already moving back toward the carriage. Sullivan recovered faster than expected, pulling a knife from his coat. You think you've won? You think... The blade flashed in moonlight as he lunged. Not at Dorian, not at the guards, at Alara. Dorian moved faster than she'd ever seen him move, putting himself between them. The knife caught him across the ribs, slicing through expensive fabric and flesh beneath. He went down hard. Everything slowed. Alara saw Cole tackle Sullivan, saw Garrett yelling orders, saw the carriage driver racing toward the perimeter for police. But all she could focus on was Dorian on the ground, blood spreading across his white shirt, his face gray with pain and shock. She dropped to her knees beside him, her hands shaking as she pressed against the wound. Don't you dare die on me. Wasn't planning to, he managed, his voice tight with pain. Hurts too much to die. That's not funny. Wasn't trying to be funny, trying not to pass out. The blood kept coming, too much blood. Alara's medical training from the refuge kicked in. Apply pressure, elevate if possible, keep him conscious and talking. Why did you do that? She demanded, her voice breaking. Why did you? Because I'm your husband. That's what husbands do. His eyes were unfocused, pupils dilating. Protect their wives, even the difficult ones. Dorian, stay with me. Stay awake. Trying. You're very demanding. Anyone ever tell you that? Every day. Usually you. Keep talking. About what? Anything. Everything. Just stay conscious. His hand found hers, blood slick and trembling. I don't regret it. Marrying you. This arrangement. Any of it, in case that matters. It matters. It all matters. Now stop talking like you're dying and focus on not dying. Police arrived. A doctor was summoned. Dorian was loaded into the carriage with terrifying care and rushed back to Ashford Estate. Alara sat beside him the entire way, maintaining pressure on the wound, watching his breathing, refusing to let him slip into unconsciousness. You promised me honesty, she said as they rattled through dark streets. So be honest. How bad is it? Bad enough to hurt, not bad enough to kill me. He managed a weak smile. Probably. That's not reassuring. Wasn't meant to be. Meant to be honest. The doctor arrived at the estate and took over with efficiency that suggested he'd handled knife wounds before. Alara was pushed out of the room while he worked, left to pace the hallway with blood on her hands and terror in her chest. Celestine appeared from somewhere, summoned by a servant, perhaps. She took one look at Alara's face and pulled her into a fierce hug. He'll be fine, Celestine said with certainty. Dorian's too stubborn to die from something as mundane as a knife wound. He stepped in front of me. He took a blade meant for me. Of course he did. Celestine pulled back, studying her sister's face. That's what people do when they care about someone. He said it was because he's my husband, his duty. And you believed him? Alara looked at her sister, wise, knowing Celestine, who'd spent weeks watching Dorian more closely than anyone. I don't know what I believe anymore, Alara admitted. Then maybe it's time to figure it out, before you lose something you didn't realize you had. The doctor emerged 2 hours later looking tired but satisfied. The wound was clean, no major organs hit. He'll need rest and careful monitoring, but he should recover fully. Relief crashed through Alara so hard she nearly fell. Can I see him? Briefly, he needs rest. Dorian was propped up in bed, pale and bandaged but conscious. His eyes tracked to her as she entered. You look terrible, he said. You were stabbed protecting me. I'm allowed to look terrible. Fair point. He shifted slightly, wincing. The girl. Is she? Safe. Shaken, but safe. Sullivan's in custody. It's over. Good. They were quiet for a moment. Then Alara said, "You could have died." "But I didn't." "You could have. For me. Why would you risk that?" Dorian looked at her with those steel gray eyes, and for once they weren't cold at all. "Because somewhere between arguing about factory conditions and building refuges and facing down my demons together, you became more than a convenient arrangement. You became someone worth protecting, worth risking for." That sounds dangerously close to caring. It probably is caring. I'm not entirely sure. I'm out of practice. He reached for her hand, his grip weak but steady. "But whatever it is, it's real. And it scared me more than the knife did when I saw him coming at you." Alara felt something crack open in her chest, something she'd been holding closed and careful and guarded. "I was terrified," she whispered. "When you went down, when I saw the blood, I thought I'd lost you before I even realized I had you. You have me. For whatever that's worth. Cold, difficult, impossible me. It's yours." She leaned down and kissed him. Not the perfunctory brush of lips from the wedding, but something real and raw and honest. When she pulled back, his eyes were wide with surprise. "That was unexpected," he said. "Good. You need more unexpected in your life." "Apparently I need more of you in my life. Since you keep making me do uncharacteristic things like taking knives and admitting to feelings. Get used to it. I'm your wife now. Making you uncomfortable is part of the job. I wouldn't have it any other way." He fell asleep holding her hand, and Alara sat beside him in the dark, watching him breathe, understanding with sudden clarity that this arrangement, this practical, honest, impossible partnership, had become something she couldn't afford to lose. She'd married him for protection, for the refuge, for practical reasons that made sense on paper. But somewhere along the way, practical had become personal, and she had absolutely no idea what to do about it. Dorian was a terrible patient. "I don't need to stay in bed for another week," he argued on day 3 of his recovery, trying to sit up despite the doctor's strict orders. "The wound is healing. I have meetings that can't be postponed." "The meetings can absolutely be postponed." Alara pushed him back against the pillows with more force than necessary. "You were stabbed. That requires rest. I've rested. For 3 entire days. 3 days isn't rest, it's the bare minimum to avoid dying. I'm not going to die from boredom, but I might die from having you hover over me like I'm made of glass." "Then stop acting like you're invincible and I'll stop hovering." They glared at each other. Then Dorian's expression softened slightly. "You've barely left this room since it happened. Someone needs to make sure you don't do something stupid like try to work. The refuge needs you more than I do. The refuge has competent staff. You have me. Deal with it." Something warm flickered in his eyes. "You're genuinely worried about me." "Of course I'm worried about you. You took a knife for me." "That tends to inspire concern." "It's more than that." He caught her hand. "You've been here constantly. You barely sleep. You're running yourself into the ground taking care of me. So? You do the same." "I would. But I'm surprised you are." His thumb traced circles on her palm. "This wasn't part of our arrangement. Partnership didn't require nursing me back to health." Alara looked at their joined hands, at this man who'd married her for practical reasons and then put himself between her and a blade. Maybe the arrangement changed. Changed how? "I don't know yet. I'm still figuring it out." She met his eyes. "But it's not just partnership anymore. It's more than that. And I don't know what to call it. Does it need a name?" "Eventually, but not today." She stood, checking his bandages with practiced efficiency. "Today you need to rest, and I need to check on the refuge. Margaret's been sending hourly updates, and they're starting to sound stressed. Go, I promise I'll stay in bed like a good invalid. You've never been good at anything involving patience or obedience. I'll make an exception. For you." The warmth in his voice followed her all the way to the refuge. The situation there was controlled chaos. The girl Sullivan had taken, her name was Lucy, had triggered a flood of similar stories. Other children came forward about abuse at factories and homes, on the streets. Women who'd been assaulted, men who'd been exploited. The refuge was overflowing with people who'd been silent too long and suddenly saw a chance to speak. Margaret met Alara at the door, looking exhausted. "We're at double capacity. I've had to turn people away. There's not enough space, not enough beds, not enough anything." "Then we make more space." Alara surveyed the crowded rooms. "What about the 3rd building we just acquired? How long until it's operational? Contractor says 3 weeks minimum. Offer them double to finish in 1. Your Grace, the budget will adjust. These people need help now, not in 3 weeks. Ilara moved through the refuge, noting the exhausted staff, the frightened residents, the children who should be playing instead of huddled in corners. I want a meeting with all department heads in an hour. We're going to reorganize everything to handle this surge. The meeting revealed fractures Ilara hadn't noticed before. The staff was dedicated but overwhelmed. Systems she'd built for 20 people were collapsing under the weight of 60. The education programs had waiting lists. The medical clinic couldn't keep up with demand. The job training initiatives were turning people away. We need more than space, said Thomas, who ran the employment program. We need connections, real job opportunities, not just training that leads nowhere. Most employers won't hire from the refuge. They see it as a mark against character. Then we change their perception. Ilara's mind was already working through possibilities. Dorian has business connections across the city, factory owners, merchants, shipping companies. We leverage those relationships. Will he agree to that? He will, if I ask him properly. That evening, she returned to Ashford Estate to find Dorian out of bed and working at his desk despite doctor's orders. He looked up as she entered, guilt flickering across his face. Before you start, I need you to do something unethical. That stopped him mid-excuse. I'm listening. Your business contacts, the ones who own factories and warehouses and shipping operations, I need you to pressure them into hiring from the refuge. Pressure them. Yes, use your influence, your capital, whatever leverage you have. Make it clear that employing people we've trained is in their best interest. Dorian leaned back carefully, mindful of his injury. You're asking me to essentially coerce other businessmen into hiring workers they might not want. I'm asking you to create opportunities for people who deserve them but won't get them otherwise. And if I refuse, then I'll find another way. But it'll be slower and less effective, and more people will suffer while I figure it out. He studied her for a long moment. You realize you're asking me to damage professional relationships I've spent years building? To call in favors and apply pressure in ways that might create resentment? Yes, I realize that. And you think the benefit justifies the cost? I think people matter more than professional relationships. But that's easy for me to say. They're your relationships to risk. Dorian was quiet, his fingers drumming against the desk. Then he pulled out paper and began writing. I'll send letters tomorrow. To 15 key contacts. I'll frame it as a business opportunity. Access to trained workers, reduced recruitment costs, positive public perception. But I'll make it clear that cooperation is expected. Relief flooded through Ilara. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Some of them will refuse. Others will agree but resent it. This might cost me more than you realize. I know, and I wouldn't ask if it wasn't necessary. I know you wouldn't. That's why I'm doing it. He set down the pen, wincing slightly at the movement. Anything else you need me to destroy for the greater good? Not today. Today you should rest before you tear your stitches. I've been resting for 3 days, and you'll rest for 7 more. Doctor's orders. The doctor doesn't run my schedule. No, I do. At least until you're healed. She moved to help him stand. Come on, back to bed. You're enjoying this, having authority over me. Immensely. It makes up for all the times you've been autocratic and controlling. He laughed, then immediately regretted it as pain lanced through his ribs. Note to self, don't make my wife make me laugh when I'm injured. Note to you, don't get stabbed taking blades for your wife. Can't promise that. You seem to attract danger. Only because I'm trying to help people who live in danger constantly. They made it back to his rooms. Ilara helped him settle, checking bandages with the competence she'd learned from the refuge's medical staff. The wound was healing well. Clean edges, no signs of infection, good color. You're getting good at that, Dorian observed. I've had practice. We treat a lot of injuries at the refuge. That shouldn't be necessary. People shouldn't be getting hurt so often they need constant medical care. Welcome to the world most people live in. Glad you're finally noticing. I noticed. I just didn't care enough to do anything about it. His voice went quieter. Before you. Before this. I saw problems as data points, statistics, not actual human suffering. And now? Now I'm using my business relationships to coerce employment for refuge residents. So apparently you've corrupted my cold pragmatism with something dangerously close to conscience. Good. You needed corrupting. Did I? I was quite efficient before. Efficient isn't the same as good. No, but good is considerably more complicated. He caught her hand as she adjusted his pillows. Stay, for a while. Tell me about the refuge, about what's happening there. So she did. Told him about Lucy and the flood of revelations that followed, about the overcrowding and the staff exhaustion and the desperate need for expansion, about Thomas's concerns and Margaret's stress and the children who'd never known safety until now. Dorian listened with complete focus, occasionally asking questions that cut straight to the core of problems. By the time she finished, he'd mentally drafted solutions to half the operational issues she'd described. You need a governance structure, he said. Not just you making every decision. A board of directors, proper oversight, sustainable management. I don't want bureaucracy slowing down emergency response. I'm not suggesting bureaucracy. I'm suggesting sustainability. What happens if you're incapacitated? Or if I am and can't fund expansion? The refuge needs to survive beyond both of us. He was right. Alara hated that he was right. I'll think about it. Think quickly. Organizations this size either formalize or collapse. There's no middle ground. Over the following week, Dorian's letters produced results. 8 of the 15 contacts agreed to hire from the refugees' training programs. 2 offered apprenticeships. 1 provided a standing contract for textile work that could employ 20 women immediately. It wasn't perfect. 7 had refused or ignored the request entirely, but it was more than Alara had hoped for. Your professional relationship survived, she told Dorian as they reviewed the responses together. Some of them. 3 people have stopped taking my meetings. 1 sent a rather pointed letter about overreach. He didn't seem particularly bothered. But yes, mostly survived. Was it worth it? Ask the 20 women who now have textile work instead of starvation. He glanced at her. Or ask yourself. You're the one who'll see the impact daily. The textile contract transformed things. Steady work meant steady income. Income meant dignity, stability, the ability to plan beyond survival. The women who'd been living day to day suddenly had futures. Alara visited the workshop, a corner of the 3rd refuge building that had been hastily renovated, and found it buzzing with focused activity. Fabric being cut, seams being sewn, quality being checked. Women who'd been hollow-eyed and defeated now had purpose in their movements. One of them looked up as Alara entered. Your Grace, we wanted to thank you for this, for all of it. Thank the Duke, he's the one who arranged the contract. We heard he was hurt, protecting you. The woman, Alice, maybe 40, with work-roughened hands, smiled. That's what husbands should do. Protect their wives. He seems to think so. And wives should protect their husbands right back. Make sure he knows he's valued. Alice returned to her sewing. Men like that, the ones who actually show up when it matters, they're rare, worth keeping. The word stayed with Alara as she returned to Ashford Estate that evening. Worth keeping, as if Dorian was something she might lose if she wasn't careful. She found him in his study, finally back to work after the doctor had grudgingly cleared him for limited activity. He looked better, color returned, movements less cautious. The gray exhaustion gone from his face. You're pushing too hard, she said from the doorway. Look who's talking. You've been at the refuge from dawn to midnight every day this week. That's different. How? I wasn't stabbed a week ago, 10 days ago, and I'm fine. He set down his pen. The textile contract is working out? Better than expected. The women are producing quality work fast. Your contact seems pleased. He should be. He's getting skilled labor at fair prices and positive publicity for hiring from the refuge. Everyone benefits. Except the 7 contacts who refused. They're missing out. Their loss. Literally. Dorian stood, moving to the window with only a slight stiffness betraying his injury. I've been thinking about your governance problem. My governance problem? The refuge needs formal structure. I know you don't want it, but it's necessary. He turned to face her. I have a proposal. We establish a charitable trust, endow it with sufficient capital to operate independently of my ongoing funding. Create a board of directors drawn from people who actually understand poverty and need, not society ladies doing charity work for entertainment. You want to make the refuge independent of you? I want to make it sustainable. Right now it runs on my money and your energy. Both of those are finite resources. A trust with proper funding and governance continues regardless of what happens to either of us. Alara crossed to stand beside him, looking out at the grounds that had become familiar over the past weeks. You're talking about giving up control. I'm talking about ensuring the work survives. Control is irrelevant if the organization collapses when we're gone. We're not going anywhere. Sullivan proved that's not guaranteed. His voice went quieter. You could have been killed. I could have been. And then what? Everything we've built just ends? That's not good enough. He was right. Again. Annoyingly, consistently right about the practical realities she wanted to ignore. All right, she said. Draft the trust documents, but I want approval over board members and veto power over major decisions until I'm confident the structure is solid. Acceptable. I'll have my solicitors start on it tomorrow. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching evening settle over the grounds. Then Dorian said, Seraphine's wedding is next month. The subject changed through her. She and Oliver set a date? Apparently. Your father sent notice. We're expected to attend. Do you want to? I want to support your sister if this is genuinely what she wants. I want to watch Oliver very carefully to ensure he's worthy this time. And I want to make sure he knows that if he hurts her again, he'll answer to both of us. Dorian glanced at her. So yes, I want to attend. The casual way he said both of us, like they were a unit, a team, a force that stood together, made something warm bloom in Alara's chest. Then we'll go, she said. Together. Together, he echoed, and the word carried weight it hadn't before. The next weeks blurred together in a haze of expansion, organization, and growing complexity. The trust documents were drafted and refined. Board members were interviewed. Margaret Davies, Thomas from Employment Services, a former factory worker named James who'd survived 20 years of exploitation and had strong opinions about labor rights. People who'd lived the struggles they'd be helping others survive. The refuge network grew to 5 buildings, then 7. Employment contracts multiplied. The medical clinic expanded to include a permanent doctor and 2 nurses. The education programs added adult literacy alongside children's classes. What had started as Alara's desperate attempt to help turned into something larger than either she or Dorian could have built alone. A system, an organization, something that might actually last. But not everyone was pleased. There's been talk, Garrett said one afternoon, his expression grim, among factory owners. Concerns that your refuge is disrupting labor markets. Alara looked up from the supply requisitions she'd been reviewing. Disrupting how? By providing alternatives. Workers who know they have options are harder to exploit. Some owners aren't happy about that. Good. They shouldn't be exploiting workers in the first place. I agree. But unhappy factory owners have resources, political connections, the ability to make things difficult. Let them try. We're not doing anything illegal. Not illegal, but vulnerable to pressure in other ways, zoning restrictions, safety inspections that suddenly find violations, contracts that mysteriously get canceled. Garrett's voice was steady but concerned. They can't shut you down directly, but they can make operation expensive and complicated. So we deal with expensive and complicated. Your Grace, we deal with it, Garrett. We don't back down because powerful people are inconvenienced by workers having dignity. That evening, she told Dorian about the concerns. He listened without interrupting, his expression thoughtful. Garrett's right about the vulnerability, he said finally. Organizations like yours exist at the pleasure of those in power. If enough factory owners unite against you, they can create serious problems. So what do you suggest? That we stop helping people to avoid offending the powerful? I suggest we make you less vulnerable by making you more powerful. He pulled out a ledger. The refuge operates on my funding and goodwill. That's a weak position. But if we formalize the trust, endow it with substantial capital, and get public support from influential figures, it becomes harder to attack. Public support from who? Politicians who want to appear charitable, business owners who benefit from the employment programs, society figures who like being associated with successful ventures. His smile was sharp. We make opposing the refuge politically costly, force them to either support it or publicly explain why they're against helping the poor. That's manipulation. That's strategy. Do you want to be morally pure or do you want to win? Alara thought about Lucy and the women in the textile workshop and the children learning to read. About the hundreds of people who'd found safety in the refuge when nowhere else would take them. I want to win, she said. Then let me handle the political maneuvering. You focus on the actual work. I don't like using people for publicity. I know. That's why I'll do it instead of you. I have no qualms about using publicity for good purposes. Over the following weeks, Dorian orchestrated a careful campaign. Articles appeared in newspapers about the refuge's success stories. Workers trained and employed, children educated, families stabilized. Carefully staged visits by politicians wanting to be photographed with grateful beneficiaries. Society events where the refuge was presented as a model of modern charity. Alara hated every minute of the performance, but she couldn't deny it worked. Public opinion shifted. The refuge became fashionable. Donations arrived unsolicited. Other wealthy individuals began asking how they could establish similar programs. The factory owners who'd been organizing against them found themselves facing a different calculation. Attack the refuge and risk public backlash. Support it and gain positive publicity. Most chose support. You weaponize charity, Alara said after a particularly successful fundraising dinner where half the attendees had probably never spoken to a poor person in their lives. I weaponize perception, Dorian corrected. The charity itself was already working. I just made it politically advantageous to support rather than oppose. It still feels dirty. Results rarely feel clean, but they're still results. He adjusted his cufflinks. They'd both been dressed in formal attire for the dinner, playing roles neither particularly enjoyed. Those donations we collected tonight will fund another building, house another 50 people. Does the source matter if the outcome is good? It should matter. But does it? Alara didn't have a good answer to that. Seraphine's wedding arrived with spring sunshine and genuine optimism. The ceremony was smaller than Celestine's had been, family and close friends only, held in a garden rather than a chapel. Seraphine looked radiant in a way Celestine never had, her happiness uncomplicated and real. Oliver stood beside her with the expression of a man who knew exactly how lucky he was and had no intention of squandering it twice. If he hurts her, Alara whispered to Dorian as they watched the couple exchange vows, I will absolutely destroy him. Get in line, Dorian whispered back. I've already made it clear what happens if he proves unworthy again. What did you say to him? That I now have extensive experience making people disappear into the legal system if they become problems, and that hurting your sister would make him a very large problem. That's romantic. That's effective. He's sufficiently terrified. The reception was warm and genuine, full of actual joy rather than performed propriety. Seraphine and Oliver danced together with the easy comfort of people who'd found their way back to each other and weren't taking it for granted. Celestine attended with her own guest, a quiet gentleman named David who ran a bookshop and seemed utterly charmed by her encyclopedic knowledge of literature. She looked happier than Alara had seen her in years. You were right, Celestine said, pulling Alara aside during the reception. About the annulment, about choosing for myself. I'm happier now than I ever was trying to make that arrangement work. I didn't know I was right. I was terrified I was destroying your life. You gave me my life back. There's a difference. Celestine glanced across the garden to where Dorian was speaking with Oliver, his posture relaxed but his eyes sharp. He's good for you. You're good for him. That's what partnership should look like. It's not what either of us expected. The best things rarely are. Later, Alara and Dorian danced together under lanterns that turned the garden magical. He held her carefully, mindful of his still healing injury, moving with precision that matched his approach to everything. You've gotten better at this, Alara observed. Dancing. I've had practice. We've attended 6 social events in the past month. All for the refuge publicity campaign. Mostly for that, partly because I'm starting to not entirely hate them when you're there. He pulled her slightly closer. You make tedious events tolerable. What a romantic sentiment. It's honest. I thought you valued honesty. I do, but occasionally some romance wouldn't kill you. Wouldn't it? I might expire from the effort. She laughed. and his expression softened in response. They moved together through the music, not graceful exactly, but matched, partners finding their rhythm. The trust documents are ready for signatures, Dorian said. The board is selected and approved. We can formalize everything next week. That fast? You wanted sustainability. This provides it. The refuge becomes a permanent institution with proper funding and governance, independent of both of us. It's strange. Building something and then deliberately giving up control of it. That's not giving up control, that's ensuring it survives to help people long after we're gone. There's a difference. He met her eyes. You've changed how this city treats its most vulnerable. That's worth protecting. We've changed it. Together. Together, he agreed. I'm still getting used to that word applying to us. Me too, but I'm starting to like it. The music shifted to something slower. They adjusted their rhythm accordingly, moving in comfortable silence. Around them, the party continued. Seraphine laughing, Celestine deep in conversation with David, family and friends celebrating something genuine and good. I'm glad we did this, Ilara said quietly. All of it. The refuge, the marriage, the impossible arrangement that became something real. Even the parts where I got stabbed, especially those parts, they proved you're not as cold as you pretend to be. Careful. You'll ruin my reputation. Your reputation needs ruining. The Cold Duke act was getting old. Was it an act? Partly. The rest was self-protection. I understand that now. She rested her head briefly against his shoulder. But you don't need to protect yourself from me anymore. I'm your wife. I'm supposed to be on your side. His arms tightened around her. You are. Sometimes I forget that's actually true, that I have someone on my side. Get used to it. I'm extremely stubborn about supporting people I care about. Care about? He drew back slightly to look at her. Is that what this is? Ilara met his eyes, steel gray and sharp, but warm now in ways they hadn't been when they'd first met. Yes, that's what this is. I care about you, probably more than is wise given how impossible you can be. Probably more than is wise given how reckless you can be. We're a matched set of terrible decisions, aren't we? We're a partnership that works despite neither of us knowing how to do this properly. He touched her face gently. And I'm discovering that's enough. More than enough. He kissed her then, in the middle of the garden with lanterns overhead and music around them. It wasn't their first kiss. That had been in his sick room, terrified and raw. But it was the first one that felt like a promise rather than a confession. When they pulled apart, Seraphine was watching from across the garden with a knowing smile. Your sister is extremely pleased with herself, Dorian observed. She should be. She got her happy ending and orchestrated ours in the process. Is this a happy ending? I don't know. It's something, though. Something good and real and worth keeping. I'll accept that. The following week, they signed the trust documents in a ceremony that was deliberately understated. The board members gathered in Dorian's study, people who'd lived through poverty and survived, who understood suffering from the inside, who'd build something sustainable because they knew what failure cost. Margaret Davies was elected chair. Thomas would oversee employment programs. James would handle labor relations and worker advocacy. 3 others would manage finances, medical services, and education. This is yours now, Ilara told them as they reviewed the governing documents. Not mine, not the Duke's. Yours to run and protect and grow. But you'll still be involved, Margaret asked, as much as you'll let me be. But you have final authority. This needs to survive beyond any single person. Even you? Especially me. I'm one woman. You're a system. Systems last. The formal transfer of authority happened quietly, without fanfare. The refuge network continued operating exactly as it had, but now with legal protection and financial independence that made it nearly impossible to dismantle. 2 weeks later, the first attack came. A factory owner named Thornton, one of the 7 who'd refused Dorian's hiring request, filed complaints with the city about zoning violations, claimed the refuges were operating beyond their permitted capacity, creating public health hazards, violating safety codes. The complaints were baseless but expensive to fight. Lawyers had to be hired, inspections had to be scheduled, operations had to be temporarily modified to accommodate investigations. He's trying to bleed us dry with legal fees, Margaret said, reviewing the mounting costs. Even if we win, the process is expensive. Then we don't just win, we destroy the credibility of the attack. Alara turned to Dorian. Can you get reporters to cover the inspections? Easily. Why? Because I want everyone to see what we're actually doing. Invite the press to tour the facilities during the official inspections. Show them the clean dormitories, the well-run kitchens, the children being educated. Make Thornton's complaints look like what they are. Harassment of people trying to help the vulnerable. Dorian's smile was sharp. You're learning. I had a good teacher in manipulation. Strategy, not manipulation. What's the difference? Intent. Manipulation is selfish. Strategy in service of good outcomes is just effective. The inspections became public spectacles. Reporters toured the refuges alongside city officials, documenting everything. The dormitories were crowded but clean. The kitchens were busy but sanitary. The medical clinic was overwhelmed but professional. The schools were packed but functioning. Every complaint Thornton had filed was systematically disproven in front of witnesses. The resulting articles were devastating, not to the refuge but to Thornton. He was portrayed as a wealthy factory owner harassing a charitable organization that was helping people his own exploitation had harmed. Public opinion crucified him. Within a week, he withdrew all complaints and issued a public apology. Within 2 weeks, he'd quietly donated to the Refuge Trust to repair his reputation. You turned his attack into funding, Dorian observed, reviewing the donation records. I turned his attack into proof that we can't be easily destroyed. Anyone else thinking about trying the same thing now knows it'll backfire. Alara felt fierce satisfaction. We're not vulnerable anymore. We're established. You're established. The refuge is established. This city is changing because you refuse to accept that suffering was inevitable. We're changing it together. Together, he agreed. I'm getting used to that word. That night, they hosted a small dinner to celebrate. Just the refuge board. Celestine and David, Seraphine and Oliver. Family and friends and people who'd become both. Somewhere between this first course and dessert, Alara looked around the table and realized this was what winning looked like. Not perfection, not the complete elimination of poverty and suffering, but systems in place that helped. People empowered to change their circumstances. A network of support that would outlast any single person's efforts. You're smiling, Dorian said quietly beside her. I'm happy. Is that allowed? It's required. Happiness was not part of our original arrangement, but it's a significant improvement. Everything about us is an improvement on the original arrangement. Truth. He raised his glass. To improvements, and to partnerships that become more than their component parts. The table raised their glasses in return. Alara met Dorian's eyes across the rim of hers and saw reflected back the same cautious joy she felt. They'd started as a transaction, a cold exchange of protection for partnership, names for security, practical necessity dressed up as marriage. But they'd built something real, something that mattered, something worth fighting for. And for the first time since this whole impossible situation began, Alara believed they might actually succeed at more than just survival. They might build something that lasted, something good, something theirs. The future was uncertain. The work was far from finished. Challenges would keep coming because suffering and injustice never simply vanished. But now they faced those challenges together, with resources, with support, with a system that could survive beyond them. And that felt like victory. Victory tasted like exhaustion and coffee gone cold. 6 months after the Refuge Trust was formalized, Alara sat in what had become her office, a converted room in the main building that smelled perpetually of paper and determination, reviewing expansion proposals that never seemed to stop coming, requests from other cities wanting to replicate the model, inquiries from politicians suddenly interested in poverty reform, letters from workers thanking her for opportunities that had changed their lives. It should have felt triumphant. Instead, it felt overwhelming. You need to sleep, Margaret said, appearing in the doorway with the quiet authority of someone who'd learned to read Alara's moods. You've been here for 16 hours. Just finishing these proposals. The proposals will still be there tomorrow. You won't be useful if you collapse. I'm fine. You're running on spite and caffeine. That's not fine. Margaret crossed her arms. The Duke specifically asked me to make sure you went home at a reasonable hour, something about you being as bad at self-care as he used to be. Despite her exhaustion, Alara smiled. He said that? He did. Also said if you argued, I should remind you that hypocrisy is unattractive and you spent weeks lecturing him about rest. That's different. He'd been stabbed. And you're running yourself into the ground. The end result is the same. Someone who's no good to anyone if they burn out. Margaret's expression softened. Go home, Your Grace. Let someone else carry things for a few hours. Alara looked at the stacks of papers, the lists of people waiting for help, the endless cascade of need that never stopped. There's always more to do. There always will be. That's not a reason to destroy yourself trying to do it all at once. The truth of it settled into Alara's bones. She was tired, not just physically, but soul-deep exhausted from carrying the weight of everyone's suffering like it was hers alone to fix. All right, she said quietly. I'll go home. She found Dorian in his study, predictably, working through his own stacks of correspondence. He looked up as she entered, concern immediately crossing his face. Margaret sent you home. Margaret threatened me with your hypocrisy speech. Did it work? I'm here, aren't I? Alara collapsed into the chair across from his desk. When did we become the kind of people who work ourselves to death for causes? I've always been that kind of person. You corrupted me into doing it for something beyond profit. He set down his pen. You look terrible. You certainly know how to compliment your wife. I know how to be honest with my wife. You're exhausted. When's the last time you took a full day away from the refuge? Alara tried to remember and couldn't. Does it matter? It does if you're going to be useful long term. You can't save everyone if you're too burned out to save anyone. I'm not burned out. You're close. I recognize the signs. I lived them for years. He stood, moving around the desk. Come on. Where are we going? Away, for the weekend. Somewhere you can't work and can't feel guilty about not working. I can't just leave. Yes, you can. The refuge has a board, a director, competent staff. They can manage for 2 days without you hovering. He pulled her to her feet. Pack a bag. We're leaving in an hour. You're being autocratic again. I'm being practical. You need rest and you won't take it unless forced. Consider yourself forced. Part of her wanted to argue. The larger part was too tired to fight. Fine, 2 days, but if anything urgent happens, they'll contact us. And unless it's literally life or death, they'll handle it themselves. His voice softened. Trust them, Alara. You built something good. Let it function without you for 48 hours. They went to a small estate Dorian owned in the countryside, far enough from the city that the air smelled clean and the silence felt profound. No refuge crises, no expansion proposals, no endless parade of need demanding response, just quiet and space and time that belonged to them. The first night, Alara slept for 12 hours straight. When she woke, sunlight was streaming through windows that overlooked gardens gone wild with spring growth. Dorian sat in a chair nearby, reading. You watched me sleep? I worked nearby while you slept. There's a difference. He closed his book. How do you feel? Like I've been unconscious for a week. Close. 14 hours, actually. You missed dinner and breakfast. Alara sat up, horror dawning. The refuge is shut. It's fine. Margaret sent word that everything's running smoothly. No emergencies, no disasters. Just normal operations handled by competent people. He moved to sit on the edge of the bed. The world continued without you for 14 hours. Imagine that. You're enjoying this. I'm enjoying watching you realize you don't have to carry everything alone. Yes. They spent the day doing nothing productive, walking through overgrown gardens, reading books that had nothing to do with poverty or reform, eating meals someone else prepared, existing without purpose beyond existing. It felt strange, then uncomfortable, then, finally, necessary. That evening, they sat on a terrace as sunset painted the sky in shades of fire and gold. Alara leaned against Dorian's shoulder, feeling something unclench in her chest that had been tight for months. I don't know how to not work, she admitted quietly. I know, I didn't either. Still don't, really. But I'm learning that constant work isn't the same as effective work. His arm came around her shoulders. You've built something sustainable. That means letting it sustain itself sometimes. What if I step back and it falls apart? Then it wasn't as sustainable as we thought, and we fix it. But I don't think that's what will happen. I think you'll discover the systems you built are stronger than your fear gives them credit for. When did you get so wise about delegation? When I married someone who made me care about outcomes beyond profit, and then worked herself to exhaustion pursuing them. Forced me to figure out sustainability or watch you destroy yourself. He pressed a kiss to her temple. Self-interest, really. I'd rather keep you alive and functional. How romantic. It's honest. I thought you valued that. She did. She valued it more than pretty lies about forever and passion. They returned to the city 2 days later to discover the refuge had not in fact collapsed without Alara's constant oversight. Margaret had handled 3 minor crises and 1 medium one. The board had approved 2 expansion proposals. The employment program had placed 15 more workers. Life had continued. I'm not sure whether to be relieved or insulted, Alara told Dorian as they reviewed the reports. Be relieved. Being irreplaceable means the system fails without you. Being replaceable means it survives. The second is what you wanted. He was right. Still, it stung a little to realize the refuge didn't actually need her micromanaging every detail. I suppose I need a new role, she said. You need to focus on what you're uniquely good at. Vision, strategy, fighting battles others can't. Let the board handle operations. Let Margaret run day-to-day management. You be the voice that challenges systems and demands change. That sounds suspiciously like you're trying to turn me into a political figure. I'm trying to use your talents effectively. You're wasted on supply requisitions and scheduling. You should be forcing Parliament to pass labor reforms and shaming factory owners into treating workers like humans. The idea should have terrified her. Instead, it felt like permission to do what she'd been wanting to do anyway. Push harder, fight bigger, change more. I'd need support for that kind of advocacy. You have it. My resources, my connections, my very expensive legal team, use them. Why? What do you get out of funding my political crusades? Dorian looked at her with something warm in his steel-gray eyes. A wife who's challenging the status quo instead of drowning in administrative details. A partner doing work that actually matters. A better city that benefits everyone, including my business interests. He paused. And the satisfaction of watching you terrify politicians who thought they could ignore poverty forever. You really do enjoy chaos, don't you? I enjoy effective change. If that requires chaos, I'm comfortable with chaos. The shift in focus took time to implement. Alara had to learn to let go of operational details, to trust the board and staff to handle what she'd been controlling. It went against every instinct she had. But it worked. With time freed up, she threw herself into advocacy. She wrote articles about labor conditions that newspapers actually published. She testified before parliamentary committees about factory safety. She organized workers to demand better treatment and gave them the legal support to do it without getting crushed. She became inconvenient, vocal, impossible to ignore. Factory owners who'd thought they could continue exploiting workers indefinitely found themselves facing public scrutiny and legal challenges. Politicians who'd ignored poverty as someone else's problem discovered it was now their political liability. The system didn't change overnight, but it bent. Slowly, reluctantly, it began to bend. 6 months into her advocacy work, Parliament called hearings on labor reform. Alara was summoned to testify alongside factory owners, union representatives, and reform advocates. She prepared for days, knowing this was her chance to make change at a scale that mattered. The hearing room was intimidating, all wood paneling and stern-faced men who looked at her like she was an inconvenient distraction. The chairman, a lord named Wessex, with a reputation for dismissing reform efforts, barely glanced at her as she was sworn in. "Your Grace," he said, voice dripping condescension, "you've been quite vocal about labor conditions. Tell us, what exactly do you think needs changing?" Alara met his eyes steadily. "Everything. The hours workers are forced to keep. The wages that can't sustain families, the dangerous conditions that kill and maim, the child labor that steals futures, the complete absence of protections for people whose labor builds everything you take for granted." Strong words. Do you have evidence to support these dramatic claims? I have testimony from hundreds of workers, medical records from factory injuries, death certificates of children who didn't survive their employment, financial analysis showing that better conditions improve productivity and reduce costs. She pulled out a thick folder. I also have documentation of which factories have the worst records and which members of this committee have financial interests in those facilities. The room went silent. Wessex's face darkened. Are you suggesting... I'm stating facts. 3 members of this committee own shares in factories with documented safety violations. 2 more have family investments in operations that employ children under 10. You're not impartial observers. You're participants in the system I'm asking you to change. That's slander. It's public record. I can provide the documentation if you'd like. Alara kept her voice level. But I'd rather discuss solutions than argue about conflicts of interest you should have disclosed yourselves. Another committee member, a younger lord named Ashton, who'd been silent until now, leaned forward. What solutions do you propose? Alara took a breath. This was it. The moment to push for everything she'd been fighting for. Mandatory safety standards enforced by independent inspectors. Maximum working hours of 10 per day with required breaks. Minimum wages calculated to actual living costs, not whatever owners feel like paying. Complete ban on employment of children under 12. Injury compensation funded by employers, not left to charity. Union rights protected by law instead of crushed by intimidation. That would cost factory owners tremendous amounts, Wessex snapped. It would cost them less than they're currently spending on turnover, training, accidents, and managing worker unrest. I have the numbers. Better conditions are better business. She met his eyes. Unless the goal isn't business efficiency, but maintaining power through exploitation. In which case, we should be honest about that too. This is outrageous. What's outrageous is children dying in factories. What's outrageous is workers too injured to support their families. What's outrageous is people working themselves to death and still starving. Alara's voice hardened. I've been on the ground seeing what your business as usual actually costs. I've held dying children and buried workers and watched families destroyed by systems you profit from. So yes, I'm asking for dramatic change, because the current reality is dramatic in its cruelty. Ashton spoke again. You run refuge operations funded by the Duke of Ashford. Isn't this advocacy somewhat self-serving? More regulations mean more people needing your services. More regulations mean fewer people needing refuge in the first place. The goal isn't to expand my operations, it's to make them unnecessary. Alara pulled out more documents. I have plans to phase out refuge operations as conditions improve. The trust I established is designed to sunset as preventative measures make emergency aid obsolete. I'm not building an empire. I'm trying to fix a broken system. And if the system can't be fixed, then we break it and build something better. But I don't think we're there yet. I think we can make changes that benefit everyone. Workers get dignity and safety. Owners get productivity and stability. Society gets fewer desperate people resorting to crime or charity. She looked around the room. Unless some of you prefer the current system because desperation is easier to exploit than empowerment, in which case, just say so. I appreciate honesty. The hearing continued for another 2 hours. Factory owners testified that her proposals would destroy industry. Union representatives testified they didn't go far enough. Reform advocates debated specific implementations. Through it all, Alara held her ground. She answered every question with evidence, countered every objection with data, refused to back down when pressured or soften her demands when challenged. When it finally ended, she left the room exhausted and uncertain. She'd made her case as strongly as possible. Whether it would matter remained to be seen. Dorian waited outside, along with Garrett and a small crowd of workers who'd come to show support. He searched her face, reading the exhaustion there. How did it go? I don't know. Either I convinced them or I just made powerful enemies. She managed a weak smile. Possibly both. Probably both. He offered his arm. Come on, let's get you home. The workers crowded around, thanking her for speaking up, for fighting for them, for refusing to be silenced. Their gratitude was overwhelming and humbling and made Alara's chest tight with the weight of responsibility. Whatever happens, one woman said. Sarah, who worked in a textile mill and had lost 2 fingers to machinery. You spoke truth to power. That matters. Even if they don't listen. They'll listen, Alara said with more confidence than she felt. We'll make them listen. The following weeks were tense. The hearing had sparked public debate. Newspapers covered the testimony extensively, some portraying Alara as a dangerous radical, others as a necessary voice for reform. Public opinion fractured along predictable lines. But something was shifting. The very fact that labor reform was being seriously discussed in Parliament was unprecedented. The documented evidence Alara had provided made denying problems impossible. The conflicts of interest she'd exposed had forced several committee members to recuse themselves. Change was happening, slowly, grudgingly, but happening. Then the backlash came. Anonymous threats arrived at Ashford Estate. Letters promising violence if Alara didn't stop her advocacy. Crude drawings depicting her harm. Warnings that she was making enemies who wouldn't hesitate to silence her permanently. Dorian read them with controlled fury. "We're increasing security. Immediately. I'm not stopping because of threats. I'm not asking you to stop. I'm asking you to let me protect you while you keep fighting. These are just intimidation tactics." Sullivan was just intimidation until he actually kidnapped someone. "I'm not taking chances with your safety." Garrett and Cole doubled their vigilance. Additional security was hired. Alara's movements were monitored and coordinated. It felt suffocating and necessary in equal measure. The threats escalated. Someone threw a rock through the refuge's window with a note attached. "Stop meddling or more than windows break." Margaret wanted to involve police. Alara wanted to ignore it. Dorian overruled both of them and had his security team investigate. They traced the threats back to a group of factory owners who'd organized specifically to oppose labor reform. Men who saw Alara's advocacy as a direct attack on their profits and power. Men who'd decided she needed to be stopped by any means necessary. "They're planning something," Garrett reported grimly. "My sources say there's talk of direct action, making an example." "Of me?" "Of the refuge. Or you personally. They're not being specific, which makes it worse." Alara felt cold fury building. "They're threatening violence because I'm asking them to stop exploiting workers? They're threatening violence because you're effective and they're desperate." Dorian's voice was hard. "Which means we need to act first." "Act how?" "By exposing them. Publicly. Making it clear that any action they take will be immediately traced back to them with consequences." His smile was sharp and dangerous. "They think they can intimidate you into silence. Let's show them exactly how wrong they are." Within 48 hours, Dorian had orchestrated a comprehensive exposure. The threatening letters were published in newspapers. The factory owners behind them were named. Their financial interests and labor violations were documented in excruciating detail. Public opinion turned viciously against them. Workers organized protests. Consumers boycotted their products. Investors pulled funding from their operations. The men who'd thought they could silence Alara through intimidation found themselves facing social and financial ruin instead. "You destroyed them," Alara said, reviewing the newspaper coverage. "I exposed them. They destroyed themselves." Dorian set down the papers. "Let this be a lesson to anyone else considering similar tactics. Attacking you has consequences." The threats stopped. The immediate danger passed. But Alara knew this was just one battle in a longer war. There would always be people invested in maintaining exploitative systems. The fight wouldn't end just because this particular group had been defeated. 3 months later, Parliament passed the Factory Reform Act. It wasn't everything Alara had asked for. Maximum hours were set at 12 instead of 10. Minimum wage requirements were lower than she'd wanted. Child labor restrictions had exceptions she found unconscionable. But it was something. Real legal protections, mandatory safety standards, independent inspections, injury compensation requirements. It was progress. The day the act passed, Alara stood in the refuge's main hall surrounded by workers who'd fought alongside her. People whose testimony had mattered, whose suffering had been documented, whose voices had been heard. "We did this," she told them. "Not me. Us. Every person who spoke up, every worker who testified, every family that shared their story. This is your victory." Sarah, the textile worker with missing fingers, spoke up. "This wouldn't exist without you refusing to accept how things were. It wouldn't exist without all of us refusing to accept it. That's how change happens. Not one person fighting alone, but all of us fighting together." The celebration that followed was loud and genuine. People who'd survived so much hardship allowing themselves to hope that things might actually get better. That their children might have safer, more dignified lives. That suffering wasn't inevitable. Dorian found Alara later, standing alone in her office, staring at a copy of the Factory Reform Act with complicated emotions on her face. "You should be celebrating," he said. I am. I'm also furious it took this long, that we had to fight so hard for basic protections, that people had to die before anyone cared enough to change things. She set down the document. This is victory, and it's not nearly enough. It's a beginning. First legal protections, then enforcement, then expansion, then normalization of standards that seem radical now. He moved to stand beside her. You changed the trajectory. Everything that comes next builds on this. I wanted more. You got what was possible. Now you make possible things that weren't before. His hand found hers. This is how systems change, incrementally, frustratingly. But they do change, because people like you refuse to stop pushing. She leaned into him, feeling the solid reality of his presence. I couldn't have done this without you. You could have. It would have been harder and taken longer, but you would have found a way. That's who you are. We make a good team. We make an effective team. That's better than good. That evening, they hosted a dinner. The Refuge Board, Celestine and David, Seraphine and Oliver, the key workers who'd testified before Parliament, family and friends, and people who'd become both. Margaret raised her glass in a toast. To her Grace, who refused to accept that suffering was inevitable and made the rest of us believe change was possible. To partnership, Alara countered. To everyone at this table who fought alongside me, to systems that protect instead of exploit. To futures we're building together. They drank. Around the table, faces reflected hope and exhaustion and determined optimism. The work wasn't finished. It would never truly be finished, but progress was real and tangible and worth celebrating. Later, after the guests had left, Alara and Dorian sat in the library that had once been Celestine's domain. Books surrounded them, some the original collection, others new editions reflecting their own interests. The room had evolved, like everything else in their lives. Do you ever regret it? Alara asked quietly. The annulment. Marrying me instead of staying safely married to Celestine. Dorian considered this question seriously. No. Celestine and I were functional. You and I are alive. There's a difference. Alive how? You make me care about things beyond profit and efficiency. You challenge me constantly. You've turned my orderly life into controlled chaos. He smiled. I wouldn't trade it for safe and functional. Even though I dragged you into political battles and advocacy work, you gave me purpose beyond accumulation. That's worth any amount of political battles. He touched her face gently. I was existing before you. Now I'm actually living. That's not something I regret. I love you, Alara said, the words surprising her even as she spoke them. I don't know when it happened. Somewhere between arguing about factory conditions and you taking a knife for me and building something real together. But it did. I love you. Dorian went very still. Then something in his expression cracked open, the carefully maintained control giving way to genuine emotion. I love you too, he said, voice rough with feeling he usually kept buried. I've been terrible at showing it. I don't know how to do romance or grand gestures, but I love you. Your courage and your stubbornness and your absolute refusal to accept injustice. I love you. They kissed, and it felt like sealing a promise neither had known they were making when they'd signed practical marriage documents months ago. What had started as transaction had become partnership. Partnership had become genuine affection. Affection had become love, messy and complicated and real. When they pulled apart, Alara said, "This isn't how I imagined my life would go." Is that complaint or observation? Observation. When your father was drowning in debt and that cold duke showed up offering to buy a wife, I never imagined this, us, actually working. I never imagined wanting a wife who argues with me constantly and drags me into social reform crusades. He smiled. Yet, here we are, married and apparently in love despite all logic suggesting we'd destroy each other. We almost did, several times. But we didn't. We built something instead. Something good and lasting and worth the effort it took to create it. Something worth fighting for, Alara agreed. The years that followed brought continued change. The Factory Reform Act was enforced, then strengthened. Other cities replicated the refuge model. Worker protections expanded. Child labor declined. Poverty didn't disappear. It never would completely. But its worst edges were blunted. Alara continued advocating, fighting new battles as old ones were won. Dorian continued supporting her, using his resources and connections to amplify her voice and protect her work. They functioned as partners in ways that made their original transaction unrecognizable. Celestine married David and opened a bookshop that became a gathering place for writers and intellectuals. Seraphine and Oliver had 3 children and a marriage that proved second chances could work. The Vance family, which had been drowning in debt and desperation, found stable ground. The refuge network grew to 12 buildings, then 20. The trust endowment expanded. The board evolved. What had started as Alara's desperate attempt to help became an institution that would outlive everyone who'd built it. 5 years after the Factory Reform Act passed, Alara stood in front of Parliament again, this time to testify about expanding worker protections to include housing standards and education requirements. She was no longer an unknown advocate fighting for credibility. She was the Duchess of Ashford, recognized voice for labor reform, someone politicians had learned to take seriously. The hearing was contentious but productive. Alara presented her case with the confidence of someone who'd done this before and won. When opposition arose, she countered with evidence and strategy refined through years of practice. Dorian watched from the gallery, pride obvious on his usually controlled face. Beside him sat Margaret, James, Thomas, the board members who'd helped build and sustain everything they'd created together. The reforms passed 6 months later. Not everything Alara wanted, but significant progress, more protections, better standards, continued momentum toward dignity and safety for workers who'd been exploited for generations. That evening, Alara and Dorian walked through the original refuge building, the converted coaching inn that had been the start of everything. It was quieter now, better organized, run by competent staff who didn't need constant oversight. "Do you remember when we first looked at this place?" Alara asked. "You wanted to do it cheaply. I wanted to do it right. We argued for an hour." "We've argued about everything for 5 years. Why should that have been different?" Dorian smiled. "But you were right. About doing it properly. About building systems that last. About refusing to accept cheap solutions to expensive problems. You were right too. About sustainability and governance and making myself replaceable. I hated admitting it at the time." "You still hate admitting when I'm right. It's one of your more endearing qualities." They stood in the main hall where families now lived safely. Children learned to read, workers found stability. The space hummed with quiet purpose. Not perfect, never perfect, but functional and good and genuinely helpful. "We did this," Alara said quietly. "Built something real that helps people and will keep helping people long after we're gone." "We did. Together. Despite neither of us knowing what we were doing at the start. Best terrible decision I ever made. Marrying you. Best practical arrangement that became impractical love I ever made. Marrying you back." They kissed in the refuge hall, surrounded by evidence of what partnership and determination could build. 2 people who'd started as a transaction and become something neither had expected. Genuine partners, actual lovers, people who'd changed each other and their world in ways that mattered. Outside, the city continued its messy, complicated existence. Poverty still existed. Suffering hadn't vanished. Injustice required constant fighting. The work was never finished because the work was never finished. But the trajectory had changed. Systems were bending toward justice instead of exploitation. People had protections that hadn't existed before. Children had futures instead of just survival. Progress was real and measurable and continuing. And at the center of it all was a partnership built on honesty instead of romance, on challenge instead of comfort, on love that had grown from respect and shared purpose rather than passion and promises. Alara and Dorian, the difficult Duchess, and the cold Duke who'd warmed despite himself, who'd taken a practical arrangement and built something extraordinary, who'd refused to accept that suffering was inevitable and had proven change was possible. Together, always together. The word that had started as strange and uncomfortable and tentative had become their foundation. Together they'd built refuges and fought reforms and created systems that would outlive them both. Together they'd found love in the spaces between arguments and advocacy. Together they'd changed their world in ways both of them had thought impossible when a desperate father had summoned a cold duke to save his failing family. The refuge bell rang, time for evening meal service. Around them, life continued. People finding safety, children learning, workers building futures. And Alara and Dorian stood in the center of it all, hand in hand, watching their impossible creation function exactly as it should, imperfectly, messily, beautifully real. "Ready to go home?" Dorian asked. "Home," Alara repeated, tasting the word. Ashford Estate had become that over the years. Not just his space she inhabited, but genuinely theirs. A place they'd built a life together. "Yes, let's go home." They left the refuge to its capable staff and returned to their estate as evening painted the sky in shades of fire and gold. Behind them, the city they'd changed continued its evolution. Ahead of them, years of partnership and advocacy and love built on honesty instead of illusion. It wasn't the fairy tale Alara had once scorned when Dorian first made his cold proposal. It was better than fairy tales. It was real, complicated and difficult, and absolutely worth every fight it had taken to build. And that was enough. More than enough. It was everything.